It is 7 o'clock. I'd like to welcome everybody to the May board meeting. I have newly been elected president. I'm Joan Ensign. And first, before we even get started, I'd really like to thank Peggy for her 6+ years of service and leadership in this position. And I, for one, am very grateful she's still on the board, so she can kind of be my kind of person I kind of turn to, and I have Peggy or Julie to turn to. And as I get through this first meeting, anybody who needs or anybody who wants to help me may. So, we did start this evening at 6 o'clock dealing with some personnel issues. We are now at 7 o'clock back in open session. And the first thing I'd like to do is ask approval of the minutes from our April board meeting, and also we had a special meeting, reorg meeting in April. The minutes are included in the board book, so if there are no, well, I guess there are a few changes that we were given this evening. Other than those changes, I need a motion to approve those.
Motion to accept the minutes with noted changes.
Mark? Second from Jack. All in favor?
Aye.
Next, I need any changes to the agenda first.
So the agenda is as written, except with the modifications to the updated staff changes for tonight, the updated memo on the DC trip, and the updated course options application that just reflects the correct semesters for the courses that are being articulated by the student. So the agenda items are the same, just a few amendments to the attachments.
Need approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Peggy?
Second.
Jack? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So public comments tonight. I don't have anything in front of me, but I see Joe Parisi here, and we've been waiting 2 months.
Yeah, go ahead, you go first. I'm
You
sorry.
go first.
Hi, well, thank you.
Welcome.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for rescheduling. It's really something that came up last month. But I just wanted to stop by really quickly to thank you all for reaching out to partner in building bridges this year, and just to make sure that the door of communications is open. I don't know how much background you've had on the development of it and how it started. This year we'll be up to 12 school districts across the county who are interested in building bridges. It started about 4 or 5 years ago. Actually, I was out in Verona, and I was meeting in a church basement with some county workers and school staff, law enforcement, just getting some input from people about challenges in the community. And the #1 challenge that folks brought up, and particularly surrounding schools, was mental health challenges, and seeing an increase in mental health challenges with young people in the schools, and having fewer and fewer resources to deal with that. So this looked like a great place for us to partner, and that's where we came up with a model. We worked with the schools, with the human service folks, came up with this model focused on middle school catchment areas, 2-person teams inside of the schools, and it's been an amazing success. Like I said, we started out with a small pilot in 3 districts, and as soon as we started getting feedback and other people started hearing about it, there was a line at the door, people wanting to get in. So as we've had resources available every year, we've expanded, and obviously this year you folks were able to take part in it too, and we really appreciate the partnership. And so I just wanted to stop by and thank you for that, see if you had any questions, and obviously the door is always open if you have any, for communication, if you have any questions. As you know, Catholic Charities is the agency that runs it for us, but it's just a great partnership. It's a great way we can collaborate on issues that are important to both the district and the county, and really get a bigger bang for our bucks and make a difference in kids' lives.
I'm really excited about that partnership.
And this was one of our #1 needs as we started to look at things that we were hearing from staff, what we were seeing with our students, and then looking at speaking with our student services staff as far as an area that we needed to determine how we could better service our students and our families. This came at a great time for us, and I think a year ago we learned about the opportunity, and we just weren't situated to be able to react quick enough. And this year when it came up, we were very excited to be able to apply and to be chosen to partner. So thank you for moving this forward and securing the funding for it, because it's really going to impact a lot of our kids and families.
Okay, thank you for your partnership. And like I said, the door's always open. Definitely, give us feedback and what's working, or if there are any bumps in the road. We really want this to work out well as in other districts.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Very
Thanks for
much.
being here, Joe.
Thank you.
Okay. Next is our student report. We have a new student here who I think will be here next year, Anna Keenan. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anaya. I'm
Anaya, sorry.
a sophomore at the high school and I'll be the new student rep this year. Amanda and Michaela couldn't make it, so I'll be here reporting from the student council. So for this month, we started out with a blood drive for April, and that went really well. We had a really nice turnout. A lot of people came, and we got to see a lot of the different community members come in and talk to a lot of different people, and overall we think it was a great success. After that, we went to the state conference the 23rd and the 24th, and I got to be a part of that. So we went, I think, Sunday, and we got there around 11, so we got to be a part of the different stations and kind of get involved in learning different things about how to enhance our student council and be better leaders. We also got to learn about some of the new leadership opportunities that you can get at during the summer and being able to interact with different student councils across the state. We then went to Devil's Lake a little bit later, and that was actually just a couple days ago, and it ended up that we had really nice weather, and we got to bring our new freshmen that were elected as new representatives for the freshman class, and we got to have a cookout and be able to see everyone and get to know the new freshmen, which was really nice. And we also had our new elections, where we got to announce all the newly elected presidents, vice presidents, secretaries, and treasurers, as well as the school board reps. I think that's all I have.
And you are the school board rep.
I am.
Will you be alone, or are you sharing?
I have a second school board rep that will be repping with me. Her name is Alyssa Kuhn,
Okay.
and she can't be here tonight, but I'm sure she would love to be.
Thank you.
Thank you, welcome.
Any
Thanks.
questions? Any questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
My pleasure.
See you next month.
Hey, Anaya, one thing I'm going to do this year is I'll catch up with you at some point at the high school, and we can just talk about kind of what this is, what this role is all about, and maybe some ways that we can look at some information that the board might be interested in from the student perspective. So
Absolutely.
I'll catch up with you before the end of the year. How's that?
Sounds perfect.
Awesome,
Thank
thanks.
you so much.
Thank you. Next are board reports. Any individual board members have educational events that they would like to share? Julie.
I went. It was my pleasure to attend the high school production of Our Town last Saturday. I was thankful for the reminder from Randy, who attended on Thursday, and I attended on Saturday. And once again, Rick and his crew did an excellent job. And what always I especially appreciate is the great number of students he finds a way to get involved with his productions. So it represents a lot of hard work. I wish our community would get more behind. You're missing an opportunity if you don't fill the space, and there was room in there. So next year, fill the space. Don't miss it. It was a good production.
Anybody else?
I got to the art shows at Arena Middle School and Intermediate School. And just amazed at the different techniques and skill sets that they're teaching at different levels. Some really terrific pieces of art, and it's fun to see the kids so enthused about it and what they've created.
Peggy?
I too went to Our Town, and I think, to echo what Julie said, one thing that's always fascinating also is if you take a look at the programs, there's always some broad bios that are provided by the final curtain call, the seniors who are part of the production, actors, stage folks, anything. And when you look at all of the things that these young people have been involved in their 4 years in high school, it's incredible. I mean, these stories are, it's not just this group. There are many others like that, but I love the way that this is put together. So they did a phenomenal job, and it was like, either I don't remember the story, whatever, but it's very deep. It was like, well, okay, but it was excellent, wonderful. The one thing that I wanted to mention last time, and I apologize for not being able to make the whole meeting, is on March 17th, I went to one of the screenagers. Remember the movie that was provided where parents and students could attend? It was actually co-sponsored by Waunakee Cares Coalition and the school district. And it was phenomenal. It was very, very interesting. There's kind of even follow-up Tuesday night, Tech Talk Tuesdays, which is the group that puts this together. And this, what Screenagers was basically, is the importance of being having a healthy relationship with the electronics and things like that. The couple of things that were research-based that I found fascinating, which apply to all ages, is when they talk about multitasking, technically the brain is not capable of doing multitasking. Literally, it can't. It's not wired to do that. And so what research has shown that when people task shift or tackle multiple tasks simultaneously, they're less effective than when they do one task at a time, because it's not capable literally of doing that. So the other one was, and this conversation comes up in lots of different venues, is strengthening self-control. And research showing that self-control is better predictor of academic and other success than is IQ. And so, which I found interesting, but also if you think about it, there's something to that. And so I'm thrilled that the partnership with Waunakee Cares Coalition does exist. It was very informative. What was really neat was looking at the families and the ages of the kids that were next to them. I went on actually the Friday, which would have been, I think, a parents-teacher conference Friday that we had off. And it was neat to see the dialogue already happening afterwards. And then lastly but not least, last Wednesday I spent 4.5 hours at the Capitol attending the joint informational hearing on the Assembly Committee on Education and Committee and the Senate Committee on Education, listening to kind of the overview of the ESSA or update, which is the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And it was insightful because it was kind of like all of the things that DPI does, all the things that exist for public education around the state were addressed in this. But there's also, for those of you who are interested in this, there is, the draft is out there right now, and if you go to the DPI website, it is now public comment period, and then that's going to be accepted from April 28th through June 30th. And what's fascinating about this is basically our state's proposal for the waiver capabilities for the National Act. And so what we do at the state level is really quite phenomenal in terms of tying pieces together that are supplemented by the feds. And later on, if we talk advocacy, there's other things that came up during that discussion which suggest at the national level, some of the budget proposals put a lot of other things at risk, as we know. So more dialogue on that. So that's my report.
Thank you. I had an opportunity to go to the student staff Relay for Life basketball game, which is always such an emotional night. We actually had a staff member who told her story that evening of her journey through that disease. There's just so many aspects to that night, but it's so fun to watch the teachers play with the kids. It's just a fun evening, so I appreciated having that opportunity. Anybody else?
We didn't lose any this year, did we?
What?
We didn't lose any teachers this year, did we?
No.
Good.
They almost won. Anything else? Okay, next is the board committee assignments that should be in your packet. Hopefully they are satisfactory to everybody. There are 2 positions that we need board action on. The CISA position that Peggy will be serving in, and Dave's position on the last fall. So we just need to take action on that, I understand.
Move approval of those 2 assignments.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And now we have the strategic plan report.
Okay. And as Rebecca's queuing that up, I'll just take a minute to provide a little bit of context. The Facilities Committee met last week to review this presentation. So what you are seeing this evening, I'm going to back up so I don't get so much feedback. What you are seeing tonight is really a similar or primarily the same presentation we provided to the Facilities Committee last week. We spent about an hour and a half having a dialogue around this topic. And what we're going to do tonight is take a shorter journey through this than an hour and a half, but just to give you an idea of what are some of the things that we feel we need to really work more closely with the Facilities Committee on. The gist of this presentation really hinges upon looking at what are the facility maintenance needs moving forward, how do they merge, and at what points do they merge with some of the work that we do with Mark Roffers on our long-range facility planning. And then also really getting clarification on how are we looking to utilize our Fund 41, how are we looking to utilize some of the dollars that we have placed in our fund balance in Fund 10, specifically designated for facility projects, and then what are some of our needs moving forward. So this was not specifically a report that showed specific line items as far as what was in that report. It was really more of a general conversation saying we need to be on the same page as far as how we move all of these items forward, which is what Steve's going to walk through in just a moment. What we see then as our next steps is taking some time to work with our facilities committee to really start to put more of these pieces together, and then we will bring the report back in a different format at a point in the future. But that'll just provide the context of what we are talking about here tonight. And so as we glance over a few of the areas, Steve will point those out, but those will come back as really more deeper dive conversations that we'll have with the facilities group. So Steve, I'll let you start off with the presentation. Joe is here as well to help with any of the answering of the questions and providing any other context that we may need to have clarification on.
Thank you, Randy. So I hear the goal is less than an hour and a half. Is that correct?
You got 10
Just
minutes.
said, oh, thank you. Thanks, Chad. That clears it up. Thank you. To provide a big picture overview of what we really discussed with the facility committee, the connection to the long-range facility growth plan, as Randy just mentioned, funding the plan, the topic of energy conservation, updating the plan, and then we really recapped our key questions at the end of the conversation, and then identified our goals over the next year as we move forward. Randy already covered kind of the introduction and where we're going with this. On the strategic plan, I think it's important to just connect under the facilities and district growth piece that there are two areas of conversation that the board has been having. As you recall, back in December, Mark Roffers came and presented in front of the board on the long-range facility growth plan. And tonight we're talking about the facility maintenance plan, but in some regards they merge, which we will talk about as we go through the presentation. As a reminder, last month Herb was in front of you talking really about the connection that has occurred over time between maintenance and technology. On this slide is just confirmation of those major topics that really have been moved from the maintenance plan to the technology plan. With the long-range facility growth plan, when Mark was here in December, the board took action to request an update from Mark by the fall of 2017. That update will include enrollment projections coming from the UW-Madison Applied Population Laboratory in conjunction with Mark Roffers, as well as taking a look at our September 2017 student count. So it would be likely that you will see this sometime around December in a similar time frame to what you saw this last year. Some of the key pieces in the long-range facility growth plan are really the Heritage Elementary School complex and the middle school. As we discussed with the committee, we certainly accomplished a significant amount of work at Heritage during the 2014 referendum. In fact, that final bullet point says that we were able to transfer over $800,000 in funds to Heritage to accomplish additional maintenance needs, such as paving and carpeting. So we accomplished an awful lot of work at the Heritage Complex. But as you know, as we grow at the elementary school level, the growth is slated to move towards Heritage. And there's a number of sections of the facility that still need additional work. At the middle school, we talked about what the next step is most likely to be in the long-range facility growth plan and what that might mean for some of the major topics at that building, like a secured entryway and replacement of major systems like the window systems throughout the school. We had a couple of key questions that we talked about with the committee. Again, as Randy mentioned, we're not necessarily seeking to solve these tonight. We're seeking to send this back to the facility committee for further discussion that we can provide back to the board. But we will recap these again at the end of the presentation. The purpose of the next section of the presentation was really just a reminder of where are we at right now with our budget for maintenance. Where are we at within Fund 10, which is the district's general fund, and where are we at within Fund 41, which is our segregated projects fund, with a reminder that in 2017-18, the additional $300,000 from the November 2014 referendum will be available from the operational funds beginning at the 17-18 school year. So that referendum was a 4-year phase-in, and we are now approaching the 4th year, which allows us to implement that additional $300,000. So again, the key questions we shared and had good discussion with the committee regarding the funding piece. We actually had quite a bit of discussion on this topic, which really provided Randy and I some significant insight from the committee members on where they would like to see this topic evolve. And so Randy and I are planning on bringing some information back to both the budget committee and the facility committee in June based on the feedback that we received at the last presentation.
Just real quick, Steve,
Yep.
one of the things that we've talked about was putting those dollars in policy as far as where they go from the 2014 referendum, $300,000 in technology, $300,000 in Fund 41. When we put the slide together, we knew we were having these conversations. We put a policy in place last year. So when Steve and I were talking and we pulled it up online, we were like, well, we already have a policy on it. We didn't know if we had already gone that step, but we already have. So that's in policy as we speak, so then we'll move forward from that process.
So Randy's saying answer to number 3 is
We
Fund
have
41. We have that. The board already did it.
We already
So
did.
great work on that one. The next topic is energy conservation. As we really have spent more time trying to improve our annual budgeting practices and how we could utilize our dollars, we've realized that energy conservation is an area we would like to have a greater investment in. We realize that additional investments in the electrical area will pay back dividends by allowing us to lower our electrical bill over time. One of the ideas that has been thrown out there is, should we consider or could we consider the savings from the Bethel Circle loan repayment to potentially be utilized within Fund 10 for energy conservation projects? We now have feedback from both the budget committee and the facility committee on that topic. So that's something, again, that we'll be able to continue to bring back and discuss further with you. Updating the maintenance plan. Joe and his team have spent a significant amount of time really getting all of our information updated. As a result of the 2014 referendum, quite a bit of work was actually accomplished and checked off the list. And so Joe and his team have been busy, going through and making sure everything is current, all of our lists are accurate, and preparing the update to the plan. As we really jumped into it, Randy and I wanted to step back a little bit, and as he mentioned, make sure we're all on the same page and going in the right direction with where our focus was. But as far as information used, this is an example of a data source coming from our HVAC contractor that shows all of the major equipment that needs to be replaced. Same thing with the district vehicles. Same thing with major systems like roofing. You can see in this example, Joe and his team have identified every major roof system at the middle school, when it was installed, when it eventually needs to be replaced. So Joe and his team have a significant amount of information and data. We just want to make sure we put it together in the right format that works for the facility committee and the board. Recently completed projects. You've all seen this before as the referendum projects have been brought forward to you, but there's been a significant amount of work that we've been able to accomplish since 2014 in the referendum. What this slide shows is as Joe and his team were updating their plan, these were the items that came to the front of the list for 2017-18. About $324,000 worth of work. Later on in the agenda tonight, you will see that we had an agenda item coming out of the facility committee for possible approval of 17-18 projects. Randy and I believe we need more time to continue this discussion with the facility committee. The one thing that we are requesting board approval on tonight, due to the timing of the project, about in the middle you see replace middle school gym lights. Joe's been working on coming up with a much more energy efficient system in the middle school gym. It's one of those items that could have a very fast payback for us due to the extremely long periods of time that that gym is actually, the lights are actually on. Joe would be happy to answer any questions you might have on that. He can answer those, in much greater detail than I could. But due to the timing of that one, that's certainly the one we'd like to have a discussion with you on tonight. The rest of them, we really want to bring back for further discussion in the context of the bigger picture of where we're going. This key question really said, hey, should Joe's maintenance plan fit the budget, or should the maintenance plan list everything that we know of that needs to be done, even if it has no connection to the budget at all? Recap of key questions. So we had multiple key questions in various areas. We are going to be focusing on these in our next discussion with the committee. The next slide shows the rest of them. As Randy pointed out, we already have the answer to number 3. Some of the other ones the facility committee gave very clear direction on. They gave us feedback on what they would like to see during the development of the 17-18 budget. So when we look at the second draft of the budget, and we look at, hopefully tonight we can schedule a facility committee meeting in June, we'd like to really dial in on some of these topics to make sure that we're moving forward all in the same manner. Where do we want to go in 17-18? Obtain that key feedback from the school board on these identified key questions and where we're going. That's very critical to make sure we're all on the same page. Draft the 17-18 budget to incorporate that feedback. Finalize the update of the facility maintenance plan. Come up with a format that Joe and his team can use to take all this information they have and put it together in a way that serves your needs as school board members. Coordinate the facility maintenance plan update with the long-range facility growth plan update that's coming later in 2017. That's a huge piece for us to make sure that those two documents are coordinated. And then really determine our long-term funding levels. As a board, where are your priorities in this area? Would you like to see us continue to try and invest more dollars in this topic as we move forward? So that was my attempt at being really brief with a conversation that we spent a lot of time with at the facility committee. Really, to sum this up, we want to bring this back at the next facility committee meeting. Take some time to make sure we're on the same page with those key questions. Connect that discussion with the budget committee for key topics like Fund 41, use of fund balance, how to fund these projects that we had seen earlier. Should that be Fund 10, Fund 41? Should there be an energy conservation line created? Should that wait until we hear more about the state budget process? Should we use fund balance that has been saved since the 2014 referendum to do some of these projects? So we want to make sure that discussion between those two committees is coordinated so we're getting both thoughts together as we're presenting not only the facility plan but also the 17-18 budget. And Randy, do you have something to add? Or?
No, I think the biggest piece is really, I think those last parts are real important as far as those funds, understanding the fund balance. We have designated funds within the fund balance currently for facility maintenance, and where do we want to strategically utilize our dollars to forward any of these projects. And then as the committee shared with us, start to give them the bigger picture of what these projects look like. Because it's hard to answer them in isolation without seeing really what's on the page. So our first step was to provide all of the detail. Our second step was we need to step back to get some of these answers, and now we can start to really peel these pieces together to show the direction that we're going. So it's useful to you, useful to us, most importantly useful to Joe as he's managing this going forward. But we felt that the meeting was long and in detail with the facilities committee, but in the end it was very helpful in giving us some good direction on where we need to be, kind of putting some of our priorities and already how we answer some of these questions to put this plan together so that it serves our needs moving forward. We'd answer any questions that we have on any of the, it's kind of a more of a philosophical discussion tonight versus diving into the details of the plans, but we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Mark?
When I read this, as well as the draft one of the budget, the concern I guess I have is, and maybe it was just phrasing that was in the board minutes, but we spent time and effort on the PTI for the maintenance staff, the assistants. We've talked about the paras. We talked about the need to have resources for the teaching staff. And yet, because of the uncertainty of the governor's budget, our plan there is on hold, and we're not certain how that's going to affect. I guess I feel that needs to be a piece of the discussion too, particularly when we've got $300,000 that we're putting into technology from the referendum money. But is that on top of what we've already budgeted? And so that's an important resource too. The technology is important, the facilities are an important resource, but so is our personnel. And so as we start allocating money, are we locking out that one resource from a goal that we have as well? And so how do we protect that resource as much as the other ones?
I mean, that's a great point, Mark. In addition to what we discussed about connecting the facility committee's conversation with what the budget committee is discussing, the HR committee is also discussing some key topics, like, as you mentioned, Mark, a QTI study that we had contracted out. The results are going to be presented to you tonight. So it's really trying to take that information from all of the various committees on what are the committees working on, and working with the budget committee to put us in the position to make sure we're addressing the priorities of the board. When it comes to like the energy conservation as an example, in this presentation we discussed a possible method of funding an energy conservation line is the savings from paying off the Bethel Circle loan. However, when we discussed that with the budget committee members were in agreement that those dollars should sit in Fund 10. They should remain flexible because it's too early right now to know if that would be a good decision with that money. So that's how we were connecting the budget committee discussion on that with the facility committee discussion. And so you're right, there's a lot of moving pieces here that we have to try to connect together to make sure we're presenting the best first draft and second and third draft of the budget that really addresses all of these priorities. The challenge we have right now is we're kind of in a holding pattern due to the state budget, but the good news is all indications continue to be extremely positive for schools with the $200 per student that's been proposed by the governor, and it's continuing to be reinforced in different stages of the legislative process that it's still there. And is the one thing that has received significant support, especially from the citizens of the state, as the #1 priority in most surveys that are done. We feel pretty positive that we're going in the right direction there. But yes, it is definitely taking the work of various committees like this and bringing it in together to make sure all of the priorities of the board are being addressed.
I think the other piece to that, Mark, is, as Steve alluded to, there are certainly pieces within Fund 10 that we're currently earmarking to the side for some of the facility maintenance pieces. The flexibility that we're talking about with the energy efficiency is a good one that, depending on where we are in the fall, may dictate where we need to go with that. But some of the other funds are specifically geared right towards facility maintenance. So the 300,000 by policy goes into Fund 41. We'll do that at the annual meeting and designate those. Plus we have, I believe, north of $1 million that we have in fund balance that we can segregate, we can designate, and what's the correct term, Steve?
That's correct, yep.
Designate, we can designate funds within fund balance for specific purposes. So we have them for band uniforms. We have one for where the student fees for the parking lot, for parking, goes into a parking lot fund. We also have the dollars that we've taken from the referendum funds the last few years. They need to remain in Fund 10 at this point, but they're designated in the fund balance as for facility maintenance. So some of those are very specific to those efforts, and that's really what the intention was when those were created. So I think we're working within a realm of what are those pieces that are moving us forward instructionally and with our staff, and then we have a parallel conversation with those dollars that are specifically designated that we've strategically done for facility maintenance and continuing needs there.
Yeah, and I think that, I'm glad you clarified that, because the referendum, the language that's used in the questions dictates how the monies are to be used, and that was intentional because, you know, back in the day when all of a sudden a boiler needed to be replaced, there was never money set aside to deal with it. And so this, and that it had to come out of Fund 10. So that was, I'm glad that the discipline is still there, and that, because that was the intent and how it was presented and approved by the public. The other question I have is, you have key questions. How do you want us, those of us who aren't on either of the committees that you talked about, to provide answers or input to some of the
If you're interested in providing input, you can just send them right to Steve and I.
Okay.
And then what we'll do is we'll put those in, those are the pieces that we'll be following up with the Facilities Committee. So if there's some feedback that you have on any of those questions, you can just send it by email to Steve or I.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for your time.
Yep, great, thank you.
Would it be all right and appropriate to continue with the facility committee information, since it's so interrelated?
Sure.
And maybe have our guests.
So we'd be moving to facilities, which would be,
In our committees,
and we talk about the intermediate school communication with Findorf and Span Creek.
yeah.
Okay.
Is that all right with everybody?
Well, why don't we just do a quick introduction. At the Facilities Committee, in addition to the topic we just covered, we also spent quite a bit of time talking to Matt Brining and Matt Claggett from Findorf. They've been working on our behalf with a company called Span Creek, which provided for our intermediate school project. I'll let them explain that the concrete forms on the outside of the building where we have some cracking taking place. So I'd like them to explain to you what the issue is that has been identified, and then over the last number of months, as they've worked through trying to identify with Joe and his staff of what's causing it and solutions, that we spent some time talking to the Facilities Committee about. And what you're being asked to look at tonight and approve is really us moving forward with the documents that are in board book this evening. The Facilities Committee did approve those for your consideration, and then Matt can move forward with their work with Span Creek with relation to those warranties, et cetera. So I'll let you guys start off with talking about really defining the issue for the board, and then walking through what the different solutions that are presented to them, so they understand it better than I'm able to explain it.
Sure. Thanks for having us. So, when we were erecting precast panels on the project last winter, within a month or two, we did start recognizing there was some hairline cracking occurring on the surface exterior width of the panels. So it's the non-structural piece, it's more the aesthetic piece of the panels on the outside of the gym box. So we kept an eye on it, engaged our architect, Epstein Ewan, to have them look at that as well. Got a hold of Spancrete to get them on board and start looking at the issue and really diving into what's occurring with these panels. So did a survey of all the panels to identify where the cracks are occurring. There's similar cracking in nature as far as horizontally across the panels. So they've confirmed that it's not a structural issue. They tested the panels to make sure that, and a third-party testing agency will confirm that for us. But we quickly identified the cracks, sealed them off so that no water infiltration occurred into the building. So the first piece of this is really making sure the building stays watertight and maintenance-free for the district. The second piece is the aesthetic piece. So there are some hairline cracks that are visible. So the goal is really to make sure that the beautiful building that we just finished stays beautiful. So the second piece is really aesthetic piece. So we'll work closely with Spancrete and the district to identify the best surface to apply to that. We'll mock up a system for a high quality paint product that will seal off and keep that looking clean and nice. Spancrete's agreed to do an ongoing maintenance program, so if any cracking does occur, they'll do quarterly reports, and they'll have us assist or the district present for those surveys on a quarterly basis to make sure no cracking is occurring. If there is cracking, they will be sealed again and replaced. So that'll occur for the next 10 years. And they've also provided dollars back to the district, $10,000 as an inconvenience, and any future coatings that would need to occur after the 10 years to ensure that you guys still have a quality product and maintenance free.
What percent of the panels, so how many panels out of how many panels are we seeing this issue with?
I'd have to look at the survey itself. I would say
Half, third,
between
quarter?
probably half, maybe up to 3/4, but half. So the idea is that we haven't gone through a full cycle or season yet, so the cracking is the worst this first year. We identify them quickly, we seal them off, they seal them off, making sure the building's watertight. The idea is that the cracking will stop, and that the sealed coating will look nice and keep the building watertight.
Did Spancrete have any ideas or offer any information in terms of what's likely causing it? Is it something they've seen before? It's a weird fluke with ours? What's the deal?
They have seen it before, but it's very rare. It's just one of those inconvenient flukes that they say has happened, but it's been very rare. Being that, concrete, there's two things with concrete: it gets hard and it cracks. That's the two things that definitely happen with concrete. Unfortunately, this being a finished surface, there has been cracking that has occurred. Not sure if it's where the insulation joints were within the panel, but again, we want to make sure, just on your behalf, that it's not something structural where it becomes a safety concern. The second piece is really the aesthetic piece and water infiltration. We don't want this to be a maintenance item for the district, so we really did a lot of brainstorming. Spancrete has been around a long time. They're not going anywhere. They've really stepped up and taken this on and making sure that everyone's happy with a solution. Epstein Ewan has stepped up to help us with a solution as well to make sure that the aesthetic piece still matches the intent of the building.
So I would just add to that as well. So we don't expect any additional cracking. So in terms of the evaluations that they've already done, we don't expect any additional. But they've agreed to do these reports. If there's continued cracking, then we can look at alternate solutions. So the district was given a 10-year warranty, which is typically you get a 1 year for the precast. So you have a 10-year warranty, these inspections, and there's still the door open that if the cracking does continue, that we can look to the next best solution. We think that based on the solutions that are on the table, that this is the best first step, and you still have the opportunity to you know, if things do continue to crack, that we can look at a cladding mechanism. But we don't want to do that in the first step because we still want to be able to observe if there is cracking, we can deal with it as opposed to covering up. And aesthetically, honestly, I think this is the best solution too, so long as what we think is going to happen happens, which is just a, you know, the cracking stops, we seal it off and we coat it. So they have taken, as Matt said, ownership. They've been, you know, this is, I think they pointed to one other project in northeastern Illinois. It's a very typical detail, very typical gym construction material that's used. So there's some hypothesis, some theories out there, all of that, but there's really no, we do know with confidence that there's no, you know, structural issues, and that was our initial question. So nothing to be worried about there.
Any questions or?
Any comments from the facility committee?
We spent a lot of time talking about it, and we thought that this was probably an equitable solution to start with. And given the fact that we do have a clause in the agreement that if things, the wheels fall off the bus, you know, we can go back and
So like, I presume you're like taking pictures and documenting all the current cracks so that
Yeah,
next year
we
you
actually
take
have
another
that.
picture and you see.
That's in the reports, so they actually have the photos and then they survey.
Right.
So we want to identify if anything's changing, so we have a snapshot in time
Perfect.
and can compare back to that.
And one thing they asked was that, you know, Joe's along with, they're coming out every 3 months, so Joe will be with them to see and obviously be a part of that review as well. And we'll be, you know, as I said in the meeting, I have reminders on our computer, so we'll be watching this too for the foreseeable future. And hopefully within a couple of years, we'll have confidence that we're good to go, so.
So you need,
Look at on the
action.
documents, then we can move forward with working with Span Creek.
Okay, so
Move approval of the documents stating the follow plans and agreements for the Span Creek issues.
I'll second that.
Peggy, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
guys. Mind if we just finish this?
Yeah, let's just finish this one.
The next item under the Facilities Committee report is dealing with the summer projects. As Steve alluded to in the previous presentation, there were a number of projects listed on the slide that he showed a few minutes ago, but the only one that we are moving forward for and asking for consideration on tonight is for the middle school gym lights. I believe it was a $30,000 line item. So we are asking for the board's approval of this evening so that Joe can start to put that in place so we can accomplish that this summer. We felt that was of a high priority given the energy efficiency return that we can receive.
So move.
I don't remember seeing anything on this. What's the change? What are you going to? You're going from what to what or what?
There are 40 fixtures that are metal halide, 400 watt, and we'll be going down to 114 watt linear LEDs with sensors, which means that they won't operate nearly as many hours as what we have.
Okay. Fits in with what we're doing with trying to
It's less than an 8 year.
cut our utility. 8 years?
Yeah, less than 8.
Any other discussion? Comments?
Are these similar to what's in the intermediate, or?
True. Only yes, true.
Any other comments or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now we will, that's the end, yeah. Let's
We'll go back to 8D1.
The summer BAS testing proposal.
Okay, in your packet, you will see a request from Amy Johnson. Amy is really representing many of our teaching staff that have brought this question forward. It's also been endorsed by our elementary principals. The request is really to try to give some some options and leeway to our elementary teaching staff, particularly in their administration of the BAS assessment, which is one of the assessments that they provide early in the school year. This would allow them to get a start on that prior to the school year if parents, and give it as an option for teachers, where they can do some of that testing before the first day of school. It would then save some time from an instructional standpoint. And then in exchange for that, there are a day where we have a work day in January that they could swap out the time. So really it would be a flexible time for the teachers, but also give them the opportunity to get some of their testing completed prior to the school year and free up some of the instructional time that they would have as the school year kicks off.
I think this is something I heard repeatedly at listening sessions.
I agree, that's what I was going to mention.
They just, and I think it's great to provide that flexibility.
That being said, I move approval of their recommendations for the BAS testing proposal.
So
Any other discussion?
the question, just a question, it did mention possible challenges for, I think, concerns for teachers who may not be involved in BAS at the level. Does this give the building principal options to provide them alternatives as well, or not?
I think it's specifically trying to target this assessment, but I think our hope is that there's some other things that fall within this realm that might be possible, and we're open to that.
I hope that flexibility is built in.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Special education. In your packet, you'll see a memo from Kurt Ely with a request. This would be a request to create an additional special education teacher position. Particularly, I believe it's at Heritage Elementary. We have 2 students that are moving in that do require some additional services. We are requesting this now for a couple of reasons. One is that we have the needs for the students. 2, by putting the position in place now as opposed to just covering it as a substitute position and having it as an actual position that rolls forward into next year. It'll allow us to apply for the transfer of service claims that we can then apply for next year, which will help us with the sustainability of that position moving forward. So given those 2 points, our recommendation is for consideration of approval of this. We would then utilize, work through HR with and put a long-term substitute in that position for the remainder of this year, hiring it for a full-time position for next year.
I move approval of the special ed teacher request.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Announcements and correspondence?
Yeah, a few of them. One was already mentioned about our town. It was a wonderful performance and a very enjoyable evening. We have some students tonight who are receiving National Merit Scholar recognition as they're moving through that process. Ben Stotts, Sophia Liu, Kurt Johnson, Ben Holman, Andrew Tates, Andrew Hall, Alexis Undenson. So those are the students who have done a great job there. We just want to recognize them.
Congratulations.
I also just want to share a few things around the table. We hosted the Badger Conference Top Scholars Banquet a week ago. This is where they choose the top students in the graduating class from all the Badger Conference schools. So let's pass that around. Our Family and Consumer Ed class made over 1,200 cupcakes and chocolate-covered strawberries. So those kids were pretty busy. And so that was part of their entrepreneurial spirit of creating that, serving it, and then selling it to the Badger Conference for them to host this. This has normally been a sit-down meal up until this year, so they wanted to try something different. So it was conducted in the middle of the afternoon with really a dessert, which I think turned out very well, and people were feeling good about it. And the last one is our Herb Cole Education Educational Foundation Scholars, and Dan Harder was recipient of one of the Principal Leadership Award recipients. Fun piece about this was Herb Cole doubled each of the scholarships. Some people knew that walking in. So the student scholarships went from 5,000 to 10,000. So some of those kids didn't know that when they came. And so that was a pretty big announcement for them. The teacher scholarships and the school scholarships went from 3,000 each to 6,000. So I'll pass those around. But congratulations to those folks who were part of all of those recognition programs. Those are fun events to attend.
And you also mentioned Brian Kirsten, distinguished.
Oh, I'm sorry, Brian Kirsten. Did I pass it? I did pass that around too. Brian Kirsten was recognized at the Waunakee Community Awards as the Lions Club Award for Community Distinguished Service. So a little bit of Brian's emceed that awards banquet for a number of years, and had to step aside and let someone else take the mic to present him with that award. So well deserved.
Okay, on to committee reports. Budget. Steve?
Thank you, Joan.
10 minutes, right?
10 minutes, got it. So first of all, I want to thank the Budget Committee members. I think we had a record long Budget Committee meeting that started at 8 a.m. and went till afternoon. So thanks to the 3 committee members for spending that much time going through all this information. So you topped the Facility Committee this month. They did their best but didn't quite match you. So there were a few agenda items moving forward from the Budget Committee. The first one is the first draft of the 2017-18 budget. As we mentioned a little bit earlier, this is a state budget cycle year, so we still don't know what the funding levels are going to be available to public schools on July 1st. Our fiscal year starts in less than 2 months, so we are definitely monitoring this, but as of right now, the best we can do is put together a plan based on what we know at this time. So this budget is put together with a plan based on the governor's budget proposal, the $200 per student increase that is recommended, and up until this point, all signs continue to indicate that this is moving forward in the budget process. The personnel line includes projected increases for the fall of 2017. The HR committee has already discussed this topic and believes it is in the best interest of the decision-making process to wait until the fall or later into 2017 as we continue to follow the state budget process as it moves forward. The Fund 41 line, Fund 41, which is the referendum for the $300,000, has been added to Fund 41. The technology budget increased by $300,000 as we discussed last month during Herb's presentation. The savings from the Bethel Circle line have been moved temporarily into a new energy conservation project budget line, so we know where it is, pending again the development of the state budget process. We do have 4.35 FTE increase in the first draft of the budget due to student enrollment increase and scheduling changes. If you remember a few months ago, we were estimating that we would be at about 3.6 additional staff members for next fall, but as we have developed student schedules, that number has changed slightly to 4.35. Given that it's certainly close to what it was that we were planning, it does not give us any concern at this point as far as where we're at. The budget requests are really identified on page 11 of the budget. For those of you that are interested in taking a closer look at it, they are all outlined for your consideration on page 11. If you recall, during the budget planning process this past January, there were a number of other requests that were put in by members of the administrative team. Those are on hold at this point. We do think it is in our best interest to remain conservative in this budget planning process until we can see the results of the state budget and where that goes. So all of the other budget requests have been placed on hold. We still would like to discuss a number of those items with the committee, but we think it's better to discuss them in the context of a final state budget so we know where we are at. As we move forward, the second draft of the budget will include at least continued updates on grants, any additional staffing updates that are brought forward between now and the next draft of the budget, any state budget changes, we will certainly keep our eye on that. And the document that's attached is, quite a bit longer than what I just reviewed. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, but the Budget Committee did recommend on a 3-0 vote moving forward with this first draft of the budget. Our process does include a second draft coming before you in June, a third draft coming before you in July, and then moving on to the public annual meeting process in October. So we still have a number of steps to go through in our budget planning process. This is just our first step of starting to put the information together for the 17-18 school year. Do any committee members have any comments that you would like to share from our meeting?
In 6 hours, you guys should have some comment.
I got one just from the standpoint of, it fits in with the facilities too, because it was a lot of planning on our overall budget and our setting aside Fund 41 and how does that fit and where do we, to me it was actually scary in that when you start looking at all the things we got out there, it doesn't look like we have enough to cover it. But I think if we get a better timeline on when some of this is coming due and how that's going to work, it's going to look better. So that's what we're working on coming up with. There'll be more of that coming up. And when you see all the numbers sometimes and you look at like the immediate demands on Joe's thing, we don't have enough. But I think as we can work through this, it's going to get better. So.
If I can add one piece.
I just was gonna say similarly, I mean, the first draft is just that.
Thank you.
It's kinda like the governor's proposed budget. It's first draft, we fully expect more information as it comes forward to help develop the plans better.
As I shared with the board earlier, one of the things that I would just ask for as you're taking action on this tonight is I do have one area that I am tracking from the perspective of the student enrollment and schedules. That's in a critical area that if you can give me the latitude to move swiftly on, if that comes to the point where we need to, and I get the justification and I feel that that's necessary, I'm looking for that latitude as part of your motion tonight as well. It would most likely be about a 0.66 impact from staffing standpoint.
Approval of the first draft of the budget with latitude provided to Randy based on enrollments to adjust the FTE of the position earlier discussed.
I'd second that.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Student fees?
The student fee proposal for 2017-18 is attached for your review. There are very few changes this year. There is a new class at the high school next fall. In the Innovation Center, there is a requested $25 materials fee to be associated with that class. And then food service fees were just adjusted for adult lunch and breakfast. All other fees are proposed to remain the same for the 17-18 school year. And the Budget Committee voted to recommend approval of these fees to the full board this evening.
I move approval of the student fees as presented.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I did. I went onto the high school website to check out the new class at the Innovation Center. And what's really cool about it, it's called IDEA, Innovation, Design, Engineering, and Art. And it actually appears in both technology and engineering education area, as well as art education. And so I think that's, I know that was like in this next phase of in planning for the Innovation Center, but it's neat that I don't know if we have anything else like that where it kind of bridges two departments, and I think it's really symbolic.
I think it just comes out as a general elective, but it's hosted in both of those in the catalog to promote it.
STEM to STEAM.
I know, I'm so glad. Betsy could change that dialogue, that's.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Transportation, this is where we spend our time.
So we did spend a significant amount of time on this agenda item. Our thanks to all three of the firms that participated in the process. We did invite all three firms in for interviews. So we invited in Lamers, Badger Bus, and Cobeson. It was an excellent process to have all three of them come in. As I mentioned in the notes, we did 30-minute really discussion / presentation, and we had 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end. We used all 45 minutes for all three of the firms. The discussions were very engaging. All of the committee members and myself felt like we learned a lot by going through the process. So we were really pleased at the end of the interview process that we went that route. At the end of the interview process, the budget committee members took time to really go through their perspectives from the interview process. After quite a bit of discussion on really what we saw in each of the various proposals, the budget committee voted 3-0 to recommend the Lamers alternative proposal. And if I could just explain that for a minute. If you remember back a few months ago, as the board had discussions on what would the specifications for a transportation contract look like, the board agreed to have an alternate included that would change the average age of the buses from 7 to 10. And with that, we asked for a quote on what that might look like. We did receive a quote from Lamers on what that alternate proposal would look like, which does provide a discount on the rates. During the interview process, we went through that extensively with the Lamers management to understand what that meant. In effect, because our district has some of the largest size buses in the fleet, newer buses typically have come to Waunakee. Our mileage is low within our district boundaries, and then those buses are often used elsewhere. Our students and our community members and parents would not really see anything different from that alternative proposal, and yet it would be a budgetary savings for the school district. There was a PowerPoint that was provided by the firm that is recommended that was shared with you this evening. I think a key piece of this moving forward, if the board approves the recommendation of the budget committee, is really the definition of performance standards and incentives. That will be on the very next agenda for the budget committee. All three of the firms that we spoke with expressed an interest and a willingness to have those conversations with us, which we appreciated. And we think that would be a critical piece of putting together the final contract for our next transportation contract. You will see there was a slide included from the Lamers presentation, which is the recommended option, that gave some examples of what that might look like. So if, as board members, if you have input in that, Randy and I would love to hear your thoughts. It was just an example of what that could look like. But if you have thoughts, if you've seen these type of agreements before and have suggestions for us, we'd love to hear them. But at this point, I'd turn it over to the budget committee members to feel free to share any of your thoughts with the rest of the board members from that process.
I guess I just would reiterate what Steve said earlier. It was a very worthwhile process. It helped us to come up with better questions, hearing the three different perspectives, and to reinforce as well that I thought the slide that Lamers provided with some suggestions in terms of performance metrics and some different areas we could focus on. They really did a much more in-depth job with that piece in particular, which I know has been perhaps somewhat of a concern in our experience with them over the years. So working to define metrics from that slide, to me, is key going forward, so.
Any other comments?
What's that?
Why are you looking at me?
Not, you had a good suggestion, so in talking to them all was key, and money talks in the end too. There was some things there, and then the concern with management, I think, has been answered, so.
I gotta say, I'm incredibly scared to hire laborers again because of what's happened, and the fact that it just strikes me they're fixing everything right at the end. It's like, oh, now you're looking at a contract. Now we're gonna jump in and we're gonna make all these promises. Where were you a year ago? Where were you 2 years ago? Because I've heard, I mean, since I've been on this board for 4 years now, this bus thing has been ongoing. And now suddenly they write a big deal that they're gonna do right as the contract comes up. I like the idea that we're somehow involved in hiring the person who's gonna run this thing, but if it goes south again, do we wait another 3 years to fix it? I don't know. I gotta admit, I didn't look enough at everything, but I remember there was talk about ability to opt out. Did that come through? And
So,
what triggers it?
so thank you. So in our current contract, we have a clause in there regarding performance. And of course, Randy and I have had discussions about that provision. We did bring that up with the budget committee. In the specifications that we put out, we did review what is currently there, and as budget committee members, they felt like the language that we have in place is sufficient for what we need as a district. So that was included in the request for proposal that was sent out and was reviewed by the budget committee. So they did have a chance to take a look at that prior to it going out. And again, I know that the committee spent an extensive amount of time on that, but that was one piece that in one of our earlier meetings as budget committee members, they did have the chance to look at.
So what's the difference in the language that would make it that some of the stuff we were having a problem with before we could do something about this?
So the language that we have had is very broad. In reviewing that with the committee, the language is sufficient to address our needs. One difference that we're suggesting this time is really the slide that's regarding performance measures and incentives. And ultimately, that's the discussion that would go back to the budget committee, is how does that link together with the overall contract? Because when we put the request for proposal out, we did not have anything in the request for proposal regarding that topic. The topic of performance measures and incentives came up in discussion after that point, and so we asked all three firms what their willingness or interest was to discuss that topic. We did get positive feedback from all of the firms about having discussions around that topic, and that's why that topic needs to go to the budget committee to really nail that down, is it to exactly what that would look like.
I think when you sit down and take a look at some of the problems, we have had problems with this with this supplier and vendor, but I'm not sure all of the problems that we've had with this supplier were because of them. You know, there might have been some miscommunications and so forth. You know, as things happen, you know, requests might have been forgiven. So I think one of the things, you know, the discussion is they're correcting all the problems now. Well, now's a new contract time. It gives us an opportunity to put new stuff in a contract to hold them accountable. And you know, when you look at these different bus providers, I'm sure they all are adequate, but you know, you're dealing with drivers that may get upset. You know, things may happen. You know, we've heard about other districts having problems. So, you know, just because we change a supplier doesn't mean that all the problems go away.
And that is exactly what we talked about at the budget committee quite a bit, that I think with all three of the companies, you know, and I think all three of them could have serviced us well. I think Lamers, I think we've all learned a lot, that company as well as our district, and I think we're in a position where I think we can work together for a positive solution. I suggested, and I don't think that the company was there anymore, that the face of the company needs to become more positive, and I hope that they get involved in the change of that face so that some of the confidence is rebuilt that has been lost. I think that that's really key and really important. But in the end, you know, I think we're at a position where any of them would work, and they are substantially less. Mark?
As I look at the proposal for the alternative cost, over 7 years, 123,000, that's on top of the difference between
Yes.
bids.
Correct.
So potentially we're looking at almost $250,000. I just want to compliment the committee. I think they did a great job. I do feel the same way that there are going to be problems no matter what busing company you have. You just can't get around that. And the thing I like, there's a really proactive way to try to give incentives to make this much more efficient for the company and for the district and for the kids and parents. So I think it looks very attractive to me. So thank you for all the work you guys did.
I think the other thing too is part of our administration being part of the hiring process.
Yeah.
Yep.
We become part of the team.
Yeah.
So, you know, if there's some individual that you know, our administration doesn't feel comfortable with, you know, we should be able to say yay or nay with
Correct.
those people. So.
Any other comments? So we need a motion to approve this contract.
I move that we approve our contract with Lamers.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Wisconsin Youth Company?
So for the next topic, the budget committee had a discussion on an area which is fees for what has typically been an after-school program that is operated at our elementary schools. There was a request to extend that program to Heritage Elementary School for the summer of 2017, but we did not have a fee structure that would match that. At the previous meeting, the committee asked me to gather some information from other school districts to try to help establish what that fee might look like. I did bring that back to the last budget committee meeting. The fees were really all over the place. It was really difficult to try to gain anything of insight out of the fees that other schools were charging. In the end, the administration recommended a fee that was comparable to the school year fee, which is a $2,400 fee. It's very close on a calculation as far as the total hours used to what we do during the school year. The summer program is quite a bit longer as far as time, and we felt that a $2,400 fee would be appropriate. The budget committee did vote to move that forward to the full board for consideration this evening.
I would move approval of the Wisconsin Youth Company Summer 2017 fees and percent.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
The TC Allen Company proposal.
Okay, so for board members, you'll remember during the special board meeting that we had on the topic on budget development with teacher leaders and other staff that participated in that event at Heritage. We talked a lot about opportunities within our budget to reallocate dollars and use them more efficiently and effectively. Probably the top item on that list was really our district practices regarding the topic of really supplies and non-capital expenditures. One of the key takeaways from that night was a really strong open-mindedness and willingness to take a look at this from the teachers who were present at that evening. So coming out of that evening, it really affirmed our belief that this is an area that we can spend some time looking at because we think we can make some real positive improvements. Knowing that this would be a very significant change in really the way we handle this throughout our organization, we felt it would be in our best interest to bring in a consultant. We used a consultant, a Waunakee community member named Todd Carruthers, when we really jumped into changing our practices for copying across the district. Todd led a very extensive process that included significant staff input, and into that process, and in the end, it was extremely well received by everybody who participated in it. The process went so well that both Randy and I think it would be very applicable to be applied to this project. Therefore, we are recommending that we engage Todd Carruthers in a project to really analyze that area of our budget, bring back recommendations. Our goal would be to bring back information for the budget committee and ultimately the full board in time to implement for the 18-19 fiscal year, so that as these efficiencies and as these improvements are identified, we would be able to go into, so to speak, an action step or steps so that we could be making changes for the 18-19 school year. The district has a consulting line item in our budget. We typically use that for things like mark offers. We used it for community surveys during the referendum. We've used it for applied population lab. We've used it to bring in scheduling experts. So as a standard practice, we typically do have several consultants come in during the year to work on different projects. We do know that Mark Roffers is going to be working on projects for us next year. This would be another one. This does fit within our existing ability to bring in consulting projects for next year. The budget committee did take a look at this, but due to the significance of it and the impact of the organization, we felt it was important to make sure that this discussion took place in front of the full board. So committee members, any comments that you'd like to share?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I just like to ask a question. I guess I'm a little, I don't know exactly Mr. Carruthers' background and definition of how he works and everything. I guess I look at this like you said about bringing in experts on scheduling and stuff to deal with helping set up scheduling. When you're talking purchasing, having played a little in it, it just seems like how come we aren't hiring someone who's an expert in purchasing to come in, do the study, do the analysis, and put it out, versus someone, I don't know, does Carruthers have a background such that recommendations or policies he would develop along purchasing would be applicable, or is this sort of like the infamous QTI study where we hire one group that kind of looks at all sorts of stuff and then I'm just wondering why we aren't hiring a consultant maybe more specialized in this area if we're looking at serious savings. If we're just doing a survey of our own people and then developing a policy on it, I'm a little concerned how far we're going to make progress on a new direction.
I think part of it is, Dave, is it's creating the dialogue amongst our staff as well to really look at what are those things that we value. I mean, that was the one thing that I saw when Todd did the study with our copy machines, etc. was, and his background is in business, and that's where he works at UW-Platteville. So it's definitely within his wheelhouse to be doing this kind of work. But the great value he had was starting to challenged some of the pieces of our normal operating procedures and seeing where were the points that we could make change. And then vetting those pieces out through those dialogues, looking at best practice, and then working with us and saying, if we do these things, what does that mean? So I think it was the piece that he brings is the time devoted to those conversations, paralleled with his business background, paralleled with the conversation that he would have with administration on where are those major pressure points, and then how do we make change happen in a way that we have buy-in to the process. That's really what I see him doing, as opposed to being a strict consultant that's going to give us a report that's going to have numbers or some policy directive to it. It's going to be something that we collaboratively work with him on. He becomes part of our process to bring this dialogue forward that then yields some results in change processes. And managing that is one of the greatest values that I see it bringing to it.
I guess one of the questions I've got, we brought it in to bring this copy center under control, and when I think when we started talking about it is how can we reduce the cost of copying, and it doesn't seem like we've reduced the cost of copying.
I think we've. Go ahead.
You know, I'd like to see some numbers on that.
Sure.
You know, did we actually save, you know, with his activity in the past? Because, you know, I'm hearing big numbers on what we're spending on copying.
I think we saved probably 75 grand per year moving forward from the copying study. I think that was kind of what was yielded out.
I'd like to see some hard numbers.
I think we saved in cost of copies. The bigger question is how much did we reduce the quantity of copies being requested? So, you know, it's that two-pronged thing. So sending it to the copy center, doing that one step and doing it in-house saved the copying cost. It didn't necessarily reduce the volume of copies being printed. So that's another layer to it, and how that dovetails with what we're asking here, because to me, those are all supplies somewhat too that teachers are requesting. But I do see the value in terms of the relationship he's already somewhat built with staff, and the credibility he's garnered in terms of, I think that relationship has been positive in the past. So going into it with a person with positive relationship helps.
So does this bring us closer to centralized purchasing, or is that?
That's what you're.
Right? This whole topic came
That's
up
what you're asking.
because we're by the forecast 5, our expenses are higher than the average district.
Right.
So we have to me, how do you change your policy, and this is potentially what we're doing. I don't disagree with Dave in that. Is he the only one that we should look at as a possible, I don't know what's out there. How do you find, is there anybody else that does it? That, to me, that's worth looking at. I get he has done good with us in the past. Is there maybe somebody that's a little more direct on that, or has had past practice with that? I don't know. But we're talking about, by looking at forecast 5, that we're per whatever expensive, how can we fix that? We're gonna end up looking at utilities because we're way off on that too, and that's the value in the forecast 5, some other things we do. But it might be that you do what you're saying, and that's a cultural change on how we do business. So it is a big item to look at and whatever.
I think if you can't look at just supplies or purchasing in isolation, they've got to go together. So that's really what we're asking to do, is to look at how do we work with the forecast 5 numbers to do a better job with controlling our supply costs. But in order to do that, we have to dovetail that into conversations on how do we implement a change process that will impact our purchasing practices. Those are the two things that I see as really coming together out of this. The other reason, one of the things we're looking externally for it is the number of hours that we view that it would take to do the thorough job to implement this type of a change in a smooth manner. So that's why we think an external third party is important, as far as if there's someone else who could do this besides the recommendation we have in front of you tonight. I don't have that answer.
Well, I trust your judgment in selecting the person you think best able to help us. But I do support Jack's concern about, so what about that past study? If we're saving 75 grand, that's one thing, but how well are we following the suggestions made beyond these? You know, so if it was a process change that saved us money, great, but we paid the person to do the assessment, how well are we following those recommendations?
Yes, yes.
And that might be something that we might want to at least review as part of this process.
What we can do is we can bring back some of those pieces. The other part is it wasn't all process. Some of it was contracts and how we did our outlay of printing across the district change. So that was a part that we can bring back. So it wasn't just a practice. It was some of our practices was on where do we place printers, how many do we need, and what type do we need. Some of our most significant ones were the type of machines that we put in, like the copy center and in the schools. But we can bring some of that stuff back.
Yeah, and I think that we have, I remember when we first brought him in, and there have been other projects that he might have been involved with that we chose not to move forward with. But I know we've got a bio on him, and he comes with a lot of experience in this area. And what I particularly liked about it, I remember meeting with him before, early on, and what I really appreciated with what he brought to the party versus other consultants who do this kind of stuff is the focus on incorporating everybody into the process, because that's what helps enable change, is buy-in and feeling like you're a part of it. To the comment about the copying, yeah, it's a behavior thing right now that we're still maybe struggling with in terms of, how many copies are made. But he brings a lot of experience in this area, but we can certainly provide that early.
Well, I think the concern is we save $75,000 a year and then we spend it on more copies. I don't have the numbers, but somehow we've got to get the discipline. If we're going to spend this type of money for a process to improve culture, then there's got to be a closed loop,
And that's a separate topic.
Well, I think it's the same topic.
Well, if there's a recommendation that's made and a buy-in to that, but then the behavior hasn't changed it, then, it's maybe review it again and say, hey, okay, remember? I mean, there's a lot of ways to deal with behavioral change in the process.
I guess I'm still also a little bit confused, and I'm sorry because I'm on the budget committee as well, in terms of what exactly it is that we're being asked to approve. So I think this discussion has been great, but Steve, you both pointed out that the number of hours is significant, 180, and that you also say the dollar amount is below what normally needs board approval. So what's a ballpark number that these 180 hours are covering in costs?
So, great point. So, in the board's policy and purchasing, there's different levels of dollar amounts. $25,000 and above always requires your approval on an item. An example was the middle school gym for earlier tonight. Joe could not have done that without getting some formal approval from the school board. In this particular budget proposal we received, he charges an hourly rate, multiplied it by the number of hours, and it came in just slightly under the $25,000.
Okay.
As Randy and I were describing it, we said, we need to first show this to the budget committee because of the size of it, right? It's close to the $25,000. While not required under your policy to bring this to you, we felt it was a prudent thing to do because of how close it is. And number two, we felt that because of the connection to this topic and what Gary had mentioned, what we are learning in Forecast 5, we think these are good discussions to have, and we thought moving it forward to the budget committee was a good step. as the budget committee members discussed it, they felt like, yes, this should go to the board for further discussion. There's a couple of things we can do. This is not something that has to be done tonight. We can bring information that Jack is describing, that Gary's asking, to a future budget committee meeting. This is something we want to make sure everybody's on board with, that you're comfortable with what we're doing. And we're more than happy to just listen to your feedback tonight or your questions and come back and continue to discuss this. So it's not something that specifically has to be done, and we're more than happy to come back and further discuss this at the next budget committee meeting, to talk a little bit more in detail about the copy center project, how that went, who else might be out there that does this type of thing. It's easy for us to get other proposals, and we certainly can take a chance to slow this down for a month or two to get your questions answered. That's no problem at all. Or if as board members you're saying there's enough information for me here, I would like to see this get started, we can absolutely go in that direction too, depending on how you would prefer that we proceed.
Comments?
Well, I guess I'd like to understand a little bit better on how our copy project went, and if that was successful.
Why don't we just do just what Steve outlined? Why don't we bring it back? Why don't we not vote on it this evening? Let's bring it back through budget. We'll provide some additional context, and we can do a little bit of additional background work, and then bring it back at a future meeting.
I guess on the other question was the intention, if we would have approved it tonight, was he going to start work yet before the school year was done?
He would have started work before the school year is done, but given our timeline, we can fit this in. We can do our prep work this summer. He can work with staff early in the fall when they come back. I don't want you to feel pressured by the timeline, because we can make this work. Given it's only May and we want to implement this for 18-19, there is enough time still for us to get, we're plenty early enough that we can take the time, to talk about these topics further.
And actually, my only question on this specific proposal was in the assess area, and the timeline was June to September. My question was, that's when, if there are interviews and surveys, how available staff is going to be. So if you pushed it off a little bit, then that isn't an issue if it was going to potentially be an issue.
Sure. I think a lot of the in-depth staff conversations, they can take place in the fall. If that's where we push to.
Okay.
Just, and I hate to always to ever throw extra work on admin to look at this, but if you're talking about a different way of buying and stuff with principals and how that works before, there's a culture or whatever to that for you to look at or investigate and see how big a change you think that's going to be with some of that?
That's what this whole process, I think, would be, is going to be vetting out and seeing, all right, and I think when the conversations we've had with our principals, with our administrative team, with staff, particularly when you start showcasing the Forecast 5 data, I don't think I've anybody approach Steve or I and say, you guys are wrong. I think they've come back and said, wow, what can we do? How can we do this differently? I think there's been openness, and I think it's been, but it's also a piece of not just looking at the dollar amounts.
Mm-hmm.
It's,
yes.
you have to be able to figure out, how can I approach the dollar amounts so we can use those dollars better, but by changing practice. See, we're managing a change process is really what we're trying to do. And through managing the change process, we will yield, hopefully, some freeing up of some dollars in the supply lines. That's the piece that we're really working at, and we want that process to go well. And we want there to be input and buy-in, as we felt like some of the things that we did, and we'll bring back the story behind all the copy machine pieces. There were pieces that when that process started, Steve and I said, that will never happen. Culturally, we'll never get over that hump. And because of the discussion and the process, it went extremely smoothly without really a whole lot of waves. And a lot of, but it was built off of understanding of why. And I think that's part of what this process needs to include, and that's a lot of small group one-on-one dialogue. So, but I think we can bring some of this context back, some of the questions that have asked around the table. We'll work those things through and then bring them back through budget and then back to the board.
Okay, curriculum committee, I think there are a few items.
I think there's 2 items on the curriculum committee report. The curriculum committee reviewed the textbook requests and the summer curriculum writing and has recommended them to the board for consideration and action tonight. Tim is here to answer any questions that you may have with regards to those 2 curriculum items.
Can we do a motion for both?
Sure.
I move that we approve the textbook requests and summer curriculum writing requests as presented.
Second.
Any discussion, comments from the committee?
I guess again, I just would like to thank the staff and their willingness to collaborate and work with Tim, and they do a great job of working together to sort through priorities and distributing the money and the resources as equitably as possible. And our staff, particularly when it comes to the whole curriculum writing piece, I think we should all acknowledge what great work they do, and that the hours that are allotted to that probably are way on the short side. But that's how this works out, and that's how we can spread it to as many different projects and many teachers as we can, because the staff works so hard on this.
Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
HR committee.
Okay. Connie's going to come forward and she will introduce the topic of the review of the QTI study. We are not asking for any action on this tonight. We have Matt Shevchuk from QTI here as well to answer your questions and to provide the context. So, Connie, I'll turn it over to you.
So last spring, on the heels of the administrative assistant QTI study, you as a board approved doing a study of the classified staff. That study began this past fall. So the QTI group came in and they started analyzing the different positions that are involved in the study. They gathered data, they interviewed the individuals that fall within this group. And this past March, early March, they came to us with their initial recommendations and findings. There were a few pieces of data that were missing, which have now been completed, and last week, the final study results and recommendations were brought to the HR committee. The committee is forwarding the study to you for your review. They are not asking for approval of that or adoption of that at this time, because there is a significant cost that will be involved when we implement the findings. So what we're hoping to do is to wait and bring an implementation plan to you and have you approve both the study and the implementation plan at the same time. We can't come forward with an implementation plan until we have final information on the budget, which will be in the fall. So you can expect this to come back to you with an implementation plan in the fall. But in the meantime, we have Matt Shevchuk with us tonight, and he would be happy to answer any questions that you have about the study at this time.
So a copy of the presentation is included in board book for everyone. And then if Connie, you can mention also what you'll be doing with staff.
Sure.
Okay.
So usually when we roll out these results, everybody's looking at it to see how does this impact me and when might I expect to see an increase. Well, this is unique in that we have some results, but we're not able to tell them what, that has been adopted and when they might expect an increase. That being said, they've been informed all along that this study was going on, and they're interested in finding out what the results are. So before the end of the school year, we will meet with all the employees that were involved in the study and let them know what the results look like and let them know what the process will be in terms of coming back before the board in the fall with an implementation plan and when they might expect to see changes in their compensation as a result of the study.
I was just surprised at one of the categories, and so I guess a question I had was how many different districts or work situations were involved for the cross comparison. We'll try to get a market value average, particularly for the paraeducators was my focus.
Yeah, thank you for asking. We did a custom survey. We did a custom survey of districts within Dane County outside the Madison School District. We would have had 9 districts included in that. DeForest, Lodi, Middleton Cross Plains, Monona Grove, Mount Horeb, Oregon, Sauk, Stoughton, and Verona. Okay. Additionally, we used a study that we conducted for the DeForest district a year ago that incorporated some of the similar jobs as well. It had a similar subset of districts as well. That was in addition to the other published surveys we would have used. So, thank you.
I gotta admit, looking at some of the numbers and unfortunately being in negotiating on electricians every single year, I'm gonna be asking a lot more details on that because that number just struck me as horribly low. I mean, UW-Madison is 1/3 higher than that number, and they're hiring from the same pool we are. Prevailing wage in Dane County is 1/3 higher than that number, and so I guess I'm gonna be very curious to see what these other school districts were saying. And while you state your methodology in there, obviously the real numbers aren't there. Are we gonna see that at some point, or this is the report?
We've provided all of our detail to the HR team.
Okay, so I could ask you later if I felt like it? I don't want to do it tonight. That's more fun than ever.
I can give you everything that they gave me.
Okay.
As far as explaining their methodology, I'll allow them to do that for you.
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss it. If we want to talk specific jobs, I'm happy to go into that right now. If we want to hold specific jobs for another time, we can do that.
If we're not voting on it tonight, we don't have to do it tonight, and I can look into it more on my own. I gotta admit, it just struck me on, and I can only speak to the maintenance, I'd be very curious on someone who knows more about some of the other categories. It just struck me that I don't know what, I guess I'm afraid if we're using too much of other school districts, or all we're doing is capturing the same problem from another school district and putting in ours. We're not really, as we're seeing this problem after Act 10 and this thing about people saying, well, the private sector is going to do better. The one thing you used to like about school districts was the benefit, and that's why you went there. Are we capturing that problem in by using a study that puts us with other school districts, and that's the main source of the number, is my one fear. So I'll have to look at it closer, but we'll see.
If I can comment, I think you do need to look at rewards in totality with all benefits and compensation, and even with the changes with Act 10 as it relates to the benefit contributions. School districts in the public sector continue to provide more value and more weight on the benefit plans than any private sector employer that I've seen today. So, as we think about what the competitive market is for these jobs, you do need to consider both the benefits package and the compensation package. That's why we tried to look at the districts as well as private sector data from the published surveys that we included as well.
So then maybe a quick question, when you put that dollar amount in for those wage categories, was that total package, or was that?
Nope. As important it is for me to say that you should look at all points of it, it's very hard to isolate those dollars. And the compensation surveys only focus on base salary and compensation, while the benefits contribution and the value of those benefits is a difficult number to ascertain, even from the benefit brokers.
Do you have access, or do we have, I should say, do we have access to your report, what the Madison schools provide? I guess one area I'm looking at particularly is the paraeducator regular versus special ed. And I know from listening to our staff, they thought there was a distinct difference in expectation of the jobs they do. And yet, if you look at the medium average, it's closer than what we're already paying. And so I can see where Dave's point, if you're looking at comparable districts, we may just be following in line with when maybe we should be considering something outside of the box. So do we have access to the Madison pay for the paras or not?
The review of the Madison School District is not part of our study.
Okay.
So we do not have that.
I just want to respond to that, Mark. We didn't ask them to include Madison School District in the study. We don't use Madison School District as a comparable in any of our studies for any of our employee groups.
Was some prairie involved?
Sun Prairie is, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, when you're doing a survey and you drop off the highest and the lowest,
Right,
and you
yeah,
just
yeah.
Madison is one that's always dropped off because they're
Because it's
always
too
so
low,
much
yeah.
higher. And like I said, for any employee group, we have not used them as a comparable.
We did find a difference in those two special ed paras versus the regular ed paras. We do have them in two different pay grades, but the variation is, you know, about 50 cents or so.
Right.
So,
Julie?
and,
And I guess that, I was surprised at that same thing, because to me, the skill level and what you're asking them to do is different as day and night, and I would think we would be asking for a more highly skilled person to deal with the paras, with the
Well,
special
what they
ed
have to
kids.
do. I mean, the job,
The whole thing.
the difficulty of the job.
So that's where my questions all went. It's like, we lump them together, paraeducators, but I can tell from working side by side, even many, many years ago with many of them, they are not all created equal. So what is our distinguishing factor in terms of pay, skill, and what we're asking them to do, or is the pay only based on tenure and longevity? Is that your only way to get an increase? Or do the pay levels differ based on your technical skill? Maybe you were a teacher before. Maybe but we don't distinguish.
No, the pay is based on the title of the position.
Okay.
So one of the things, just to interject here, Julie, that I think plays into what you're talking about, one of the things we talked about during our joint eval piece was how do we look at compensation as we move forward? And I think part of that is looking at the minimal, help me with my words here, Connie, minimum and median and
So,
our beginning and our middle. is
Yes.
really what I'm
Right.
looking at.
Right.
How do you, thank you, how do you start to differentiate? I mean, right now, we've said, if we start somebody, here's kind of where they're gonna be. And then we have a piece that, for initial placement, we're saying, for folks who are more veteran in our system, we're putting them at the median area, which is what we did with our admin assistant group. It's, how do you differentiate now moving forward? And I think those are the pieces that we've got to start thinking about, is what are those, you can call them technical skills, you can talk, those different pieces, we've got to flush that out. At this point in this study, we don't. Right now, it's very much a strict, here's the position, what's the kind of comparables for the pay. I think the first thing we have to do is get in line with what we are seeing as our comparables. The second piece we have to look at, which I think is a big conversation we need to have probably over the next year and extended, is what does that look like for all of our employee groups, as far as how do you either incentivize or reward different levels of through compensation for skills, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's the next piece that I think we have to do. And I think we have some ideas that we can bring forward for that discussion, but that's kind of step 2 of this process in my view.
Why did the plumber number disappear? There was no number given for the plumber category?
Plumber disappeared.
Plumber disappeared because
Did we get the?
No.
He quit.
I think they I think it was viewed as far as the level of plumbing that the individual does. It linked more in with the general maintenance staff.
Yes.
That's my only.
Thank
Dave,
you.
when you talk about the electrician, you know, are they doing electrical work 100% of their day?
Our
In these
electrician.
jobs, and I don't think they are. Or the plumber guy is doing some plumbing, and he's getting extra compensation from being a plumbing guy because he has a skill set that does something that other normal maintenance can't do. But is he 100% an electrician like your guys are? I don't know that that's always.
So maybe I missed it. Where did you recommend putting it?
So that's a great question, Dave, and it is kind of what was said is
Page 11.
we have found that the electrician is doing electrical work all day long, or if not, our goal is to have him doing nothing but electrical work. That isn't the case with the plumber. Years ago, when we decided that we would approach maintenance staff with specialization, and when we hired somebody that had a plumbing background, our intent was to have them focusing on plumbing work, but the reality is that there hasn't been enough plumbing work to really identify this person and pay them as a plumber. They're working more as a general maintenance worker with some plumbing work sprinkled in, but it's a completely different situation than that of the electrician.
So where, that person, where is he being, what are the 4 categories? I saw there were basically 4 pay categories in the maintenance area. Where are you saying he belongs then?
So there's
Go ahead.
custodian, head custodian, maintenance, and electrician. Electrician would be separated out as its own unique.
So the plumber would be under maintenance?
Yes.
Okay.
Peggy.
Yeah, what I wanted to do is just kind of piggyback on some of what Randy was starting to talk about, and we'll be talking about this maybe next month or something. And it's really when we came up with our system-wide priorities, one of them that we've identified for both the board and superintendent is to evaluate salary, benefits, and strategies. I mean, it's something, and basically what needs to be done is to identify, okay, what does that mean, so that we can be working on that in a systematic way this year. And this type of information feeds into that, as well as some of our other practices and other surveys and studies we've done. Mark?
Question I had with the, this study compared to the other QTI study for administrative assistants. Did this look strictly at salaries? Did it also look at responsibilities? Because I remember there were some questions from our employees about how they viewed their job versus the study did. So was this limited strictly to salary, or?
This was more limited than that one, and here's why. I mean, when you look at the numbers of employees, like the number of people we employ as paraeducators versus administrative assistants, we have, one, pick an administrative assistant. There's one person in the entire district. And so we have a limited number of administrative assistants across the district. Responsibilities are split in our district potentially differently than they are split in other districts. So it was a more in-depth study looking at the individuals and what the scope of responsibility is as compared to in our district, regular ed paraeducator does a certain scope of responsibilities, and it might be slightly different in other districts, but for the most part, yeah.
I just think with the whole para category, I mean, this just barely scratches the surface, and I've got more questions than I think the study probably provided. Because you did, so I'm surmising then as part of this, you didn't interview every single para and say, so what do you do? No. You just took the job description we have on hand, but we have no idea how our actual people are functioning under that job description. Do you know what I'm saying?
I
Because some of
do.
them might be making copies and cutting paper and putting up bulletin boards. And some of them might actually be working in small groups. And some of them might be bilingual. And some of them might, like I say, have just short of a elementary teaching degree or whatever. And
Right. Again, Julie, I totally understand what you're asking and what you're saying. This study was more limited.
Got it.
We didn't get into those things.
Mhm.
It was really identifying the positions separate from the individuals that hold them and looking at data that says, what is the market saying this position is valued at?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think Randy said well with the, you know, you need to decide about the wage setting or the first place and then how one may move through that range. This is really a benchmarking study, and the approach is to understand the essence of these jobs. Your district is not unlike every other district where job responsibilities may morph depending on the manager of that individual or the oversight. So, you know, to understand each and everyone's individual job responsibilities and how they compare to somebody else at another district and their each and individual job responsibilities. That's a limitation of the accessibility data that we have.
I think to your point, you almost have to change the job descriptions, you know, and I don't think that was your intention of putting the QTI study.
No.
It was basically, as you indicated, benchmarking. So you know, if there are, you know, more categories, you know, special ed with teaching certificate or whatever, and if that's what we need, you know, to run our department, our school system. So I think, you know, staff has provided job descriptions for what they need, I'm assuming.
Well, I think it is a benchmark, and as Peggy said, it's one of our goals, and I just think it's information that we now have, and as we get the budget finished, hopefully it all has a place.
It's a good starting point.
It is.
I would say if you have specific questions as you're looking through it, or pieces of information you're looking at, I would say just if you send it to Connie so that she can either take a look at the data, share that with you, or make sure we clarify it with Matt and see where we're at. I think we can work together and kind of piecing that together. One of the pieces that we started off with, as Connie said, was the next step we have to do is start to look at how do we step forward with this within a context of where our budget allows, which is what we've done with our other studies and our other approaches to salary over time as well. So that's the piece that we will be working on and bringing back, and we also have to see how does that move forward with regards to each of the different job categories within the study. And is our approach similar or different? So those are the pieces that need to progress forward that'll hopefully give you a little bit better context as far as where things fall and where people fall. But if you have immediate questions, I'd say connect them in with Connie and we'll do our best to get you the answer.
Thank you.
Great, thanks for being here, Matt.
The other part of our HR committee is to begin our kind of dissemination of things that Peggy and I have been working on over the year to hopefully improve and streamline and make the whole superintendent evaluation more effective and personal to us. So we had 3 documents in board books, and Peggy provided hard copies of the 3 documents. And I'm going to turn it over to Peggy in a minute, but I just want to say before I do, our intent in bringing it here tonight, we have nothing for approval. It's really to get your eyes on it and to start tearing it apart, making it fit for you. It's a draft and truly a draft. It's something that we put together. It's a whole different version than what we have had in the past. Instead of hundreds of individual bullets, it's a statement, it's performance indicators, and then it's a ranking within that. And hopefully you can just kind of reflect and look at it and rank these standards. Anyway, Peggy has put in tons and tons of work. Comments from you, Peggy?
Well, the one thing I'd like to say is, first of all, I know we've had this kind of as an agenda item for a while. It all started with also making sure that we got the input that we got from everybody around this table last summer, provided the framework for what do we want to see and get from evaluation processes. If you remember, there was kind of an open-ended series of questions. We actually started, Joan and I started looking at and fine-tuning what should this look at here, basically more in October, November. Basically it was after we had the opportunity as an HR committee to talk about, okay, how are we going to move this forward? We've basically gone through looked at different rubric designs and frameworks. We actually had one whole different approach that we were going to take, which had superintendent leadership as one domain and superintendent responsibilities as another, with components underneath that. And we're really trying to align our current tool and other tools from, I think it was Ohio, Michigan. And basically, and I want to thank Joan for then saying, hey, okay, this isn't like working. We were both getting frustrated. So she found something from Oregon, which actually started going, And it was reflective of all of the stuff we've been researching. And when you go back and look at what we were looking at around this table from the survey, said, maybe this kind of an approach. It's still aligned with the professional standards for educational leaders, which is important. I mean, that's something that Randy was looking for because it aligns with where the profession is going. And so you'll see what you have in front of you is an overview top page which talks about ultimately our goal is to have a two-part evaluation tool. This is the part that wouldn't change. Basically, it's the professional standards. What do we expect from the person who's going to be in this position in terms of roles and responsibilities as a superintendent. Next month we'll bring to you the goals part, and that would change each year, and it comes out of basically our evaluation meeting discussion and the priorities that came out of that. So ultimately in the end you have a document like this, which is reflective of professional practice. And then also a couple of other items that would be included in the summary, which have goals, and we'll review that next month with you. Our intent is for you to take a look at this and see how it feels. The overview, there's also a timeline. If you look on the back page of the top, on the back side of the overview, we did our goal initially was to have this done in June. I mean, basically do an evaluation at the end of the school year. However, there was also input from the board earlier on where it was important that people who were involved in the evaluation still be involved in the setting of the goals, and then the evaluation be available for the following year, so that people, and the election cycle starts playing a role in all of that. So it was important to have this process maybe line up to something like this, which is up for debate as well. But if we can figure out a way to do it in March and April instead of when we've been doing it, it still gives us enough time throughout the school year to do the tools, but then also have our meeting where we can be discussing results and then start to establish goals for next year. Then there is a one-page instruction on top of the tool itself. So what we're looking for is feedback for you to be thinking about this, and we'll be coming back next month with the goals piece of it, which is a continuation of our discussion from the priorities that we established, and then that should give you all the pieces. We kind of went through it at the HR committee. There was too much stuff to present to the board at one time, so I said let's do it in phases.
I think if everybody takes a look at the documents that Joan and Peggy put together, and you can share any input, we just use Rebecca as a conduit for that, and then whatever she receives, then she can kick back to Joan grateful for feedback, and then we'll continue to bring this piece back onto the agenda. And like was said, that the second part of this will come next month, and I believe we're looking to have then an adoption of a new process by the August meeting.
Mark.
First of all, you guys did a great job. I've worked with other kinds of evaluations, both for writing and for staff, and this looks very promising. I know how hard your efforts were to come up with this.
It was nice to have some models to turn to, but we did actually take our own stuff and try to tweak it and add it.
Well, I noticed a couple of phrases were there, so I could see that. But two questions. Part one, part two. Is part two weighted at all? I mean, will there be is it just a standalone summation, or does it have a weight that adds with part one?
Actually, the only reason we say part one, part two, and maybe that's needs to be, part one is this, which is
right.
more of a sum. I mean, it doesn't change. And the part two would be whatever goals we establish that came out of our meeting about a month and a half ago.
Right.
And so, and that is already identified. But we have to put some performance indicators to how are we going to evaluate ourselves.
Yeah, so will there be a rating on it then, or?
Well, I don't know. That's something that we need to talk about, because what's happened with some of these, even this part, is that some states or districts will put individual ratings to each of the standards. They say, I want a higher weight on this or a higher weight on that. Some do that.
Right.
But I guess that's up for discussion. If we want to say, well, we're going to put 80 to 90% on the professional standards and 10% on the goals, or that's
okay.
to be determined. But that wasn't what we were thinking at this point.
I guess my vision was that the evaluation of our superintendent and our personal board evaluation together kind of define a goal-setting process for the next year. And it's really, that's the biggie. We need the goals for the next year, and I think it should come out of, this model.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I don't know if I think the goals is what we want to get to. And this is the process to get to the goals, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Anyway, we would just appreciate if you would read, maybe try to take it. As you do that, you might be able to make some notes and just feed them back to Rebecca, and she'll feed them to us, and we'll update and work. It's a work in progress.
I echo Mark's thanks. I think this definitely represents a lot of work. You're moving us forward, and I think we're headed the right direction. We're on the right track.
Okay, we are done with facilities, so policy.
Take a look at the policy reports tonight. There's two policies that will be in front of you. The first one is policy 422. This is the second reading of this policy. This is the one that the change reflects the desire and the recommendation to move towards being certified as an F1 visa school. What you will see since the last iteration of this being in front of you last month is we've learned a little bit more about the process. There are some fees that are associated with being certified, as are articulated in your notes, and we also have realized that to be certified is about a 9-month process. So this includes some of the paperwork that Julie Gangler would be working with. It also includes an on-site visit by the Immigration and Customs folks. So the process cannot be completed in a time for fall 2017. We didn't realize that until we really were able to move into the process, and Julie specifically was asking questions with regards to how quickly these turnarounds can occur, and in talking to other districts that have recently gone through it, we received the answer both from the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency along with other school districts that this is a 9 to 12 month process. We're hoping 9 on our end. But this policy is in front of you for a second reading tonight. If this is the direction that you're comfortable with, then we would need a motion and action on it this evening for us to move forward.
Can you help me understand why we're going through this process again? I know you probably told us that last meeting.
This really has come about because we have some residents in our community who have relatives from other countries that are looking to live with them, and they would like them to attend school in Waunakee, in the district that they live in. In order for them to do so, they have to go through the visa they're receiving is an F1 visa. In order for a school to accept F1 visa students, you have to be certified as an F1 visa school. So many of the private schools in the area, most private schools have F1 visa certification, and a handful of public schools do. We went through this, and it's probably 5 or 6 years ago, I'm thinking, Steve, we would think back on it, where we did this for a student not that long ago, Rebecca?
I was thinking 10.
10 years? All right.
We actually had that student with us.
All right.
Did you have it?
So,
Yeah.
so we then had we did not then renew the certification after that. I think we learned some things in that process. Part of it was when we stepped through it, we didn't quite understand, and there wasn't real clear direction on what that meant. Mm-hmm. Now that we know more about it, and the reason this came back to policy, Jack, was when we looked at our policy, it says, you can accept F1 visa students, but in order to accept them, you need to be an F1 visa school. So I thought, let's decide, do we want to be an F1 visa school? So as this went through the policy committee, the recommendation was that we should walk through this process. We have 2 families right now that would like to access it for the fall, which we know right now is not possible. But this would situate us then for the future that we would just we would get our certification and maintain it. So as we had any other activity of this nature, we would.
So you're to maintain it. What does that mean?
It's just an annual recertification, I believe.
So
and
we're
there's
paying,
not
paying $1,700 every.
No, you pay that just once. It's just the initial certification costs. The recertification, from our research, is there is no cost for the recertification. Any student who attends under an F1 visa needs to pay full tuition. So they're considered different as far as our student counts. They need to actually pay full tuition. That's the DPI determined rate for tuition. So that's the situation with our policy and with F1 students.
When we had that student come, I believe she was here 8 years ago, and she lived with us when she was a senior. And the reason she came as an F1 visa student instead of an exchange student, she wanted to stay in the United States for college. And by having that high school diploma and the visa, she was able to stay and continue her education in the United States, which she did. And if you're here as an exchange student, you must go back. That's a requirement. So I think that's the advantage, or one of the reasons that a student would want to come. They want to come more than that senior year, but they want that high school diploma.
Right. And from our understanding, an F1 visa student could go to a private school and stay there multiple years. A public school, they can come for 1 year. Mm-hmm. But once they go to the university, they can continue their studies there.
Mm-hmm. Mark?
It just seems to me a real win-win. It's a nominal fee, $2,300 one time. The student benefits, but I think our district benefits. The enrichment of that student, on the student body, on the community can be tremendous. And it's unfortunate we can't, if we approve of it, expedite the matter for this particular family for this fall. But going forward, what a great opportunity for the community and for other students.
What you're voting on tonight is the policy, which then just puts us in the position to maintain our F1 visa status. And our first piece stepping through that will be to be certified, which will take us some time to do.
Did it take us that long to do it that time, the first time? And I guess the other question is, we have the,
I think it's really changed.
Part of it is, I
I couldn't
believe
remember.
things have evolved quite. I mean, I think probably when you went through it, it was the immigration naturalization group, then it turned into Homeland Security, now it's into immigration customs.
And the language in the policy right now is really reflective of what we thought it was, but we have to be recertified, so it's
What
not.
this is basically just saying is that we will continue our certification as an F1 school.
And then the families are understanding of this?
We've been in contact with them.
Okay, because it's like, well, they thought they could, but now they can't. Okay.
I think one of them has a student that's in a private school right now that they would like to have attending.
Okay.
So there's some different individual circumstances. So for tonight, what I'm looking for is action on policy 422 with the changes articulated for it to be continued, to maintain and continue our F1 visa certification.
So move that we accept the policy.
Second.
Comments, Gary?
It says students who are eligible for a tuition waiver, what's that then?
That's different. So this policy really, that's part of if a student is started school here, lived here, moved to, for example, Middleton, they're able to continue to attend here. That's state law. So this policy covers a lot of different situations than just F1 students. The tuition waiver is I think it's tied in as part of the open enrollment law, but that's a requirement that if they start in one school district, move to another one, they're able to continue and then can apply for the next open enrollment cycle. Stretching me on my state law here.
Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Facility use policy
Okay.
and fee structure.
The second item has a number of moving parts to it, and I'll turn it over to Aaron in just a moment. He has put a memo to some of the work that he's done. In short, what we're really looking at is policy number 830, and we have two changes that we are recommending be in policy. The first one is is written within the policy itself, the designation of what constitutes a youth athletic organization, a resident youth athletic organization. And we have stated that as being that their membership consists of 80% of residents. So that's a situation I think that will give Aaron then the tools to be able to decide at what levels would they fall within some of our pay structures, because for some of our categories where we have 80% or more, we waive some of those fees at different levels of use of facilities. This just helps to further define that. It probably plays in most closely when we start to look at things like our swim club and similar type of activities. It is actually a language that we had under our fee structure before, but we felt that it really strengthened it by having it within the policy itself. The second change that you would see on the second page of that document is that categories of where a group would be categorized would be up to the athletic director. So as he's working through and identifying what category would a group who wants to use a facility fall within, that would be something that would be assigned by the athletic director. And the third piece that we are looking there is to separate out and keep a separate fee structure for use of facilities that's not part of the policy. But then that could come back to the board either on an annual basis or as needed to approve those really rental fees, similar to how Steve had forwarded fees for budget purposes. So those are really the three different pieces that are falling within the policy aspects. The language changes for the identification of a local youth organization, the designation that the AD will decide on the categories, and then the designation that a separate fee structure will be set up that the athletic director will bring to the board on a regular, I think it's an annual basis or on an as-needed basis as those change. So that's really the policy aspects of it. The other pieces that we wanted to walk through tonight are just some things related to Warrior Stadium. So why don't I kind of parcel this out, because there's a lot of stuff here. Any questions particularly on the policy changes that are being recommended for tonight? Really the statements about the percentages, and then just really the roles that are being assigned to the athletic director in this case. This is the first reading of this policy, so there is no action tonight on that. Is the board comfortable with the fee structures being separated out from policy completely, being a separate document that then we would review as we come through the fee structure process as we do for everything else? Comfortable with that? Okay. All right. Aaron, why don't I have, if you want to take a couple of the other pieces. One is being the Warrior Stadium, being a large change to really of a venue that we have, and how some of the ways that you're looking to manage that and some of the fees that you're structuring around that. If you can kind of walk the board through that aspect tonight as well.
Sure. So we have developed, working with some other athletic directors to see what they did, we developed a priority list when it comes to reservations and reserving that space, starting with our students, our programs, and then kind of working out from there, going that way. We've also looked at costs associated with these improvements and making sure that we have funds available when it comes time for replacement or repairs, that we have things segregated out for that, and working with Steve to earmark some of those things, those costs later on, and working with other athletic directors to see what their charges are. We set down a number of $100 an hour, plus looking at a maintenance fee of $30 an hour for a staff member to be at those facilities, at those events and things of that nature. Working through that, we also developed a policy of regulating what can be used on that field, in those fields, and things like that. So we have an understanding of what's allowed in the stadium, not allowed in the stadium, what we as a district will do for the groups that come there that want to use it, what we'll allow them to do while they're in the stadium, and develop that process. We also looked at the other aspects of Warrior Stadium and how this facility is going to be different from what we have in terms of when we have a field house or things like that, where we have a large open air stadium where there's a lot more opportunities to use it, so it's not shut down. So we need to kind of change our philosophy behind how we've looked at it before, and so we're hoping to, by putting down these policies and these guidelines, it'll help my conversations with outside groups when we talk about what's available, when it's available, why it's available, and why it's not available, something like that. So it's kind of the nature, what led us down this path of these policy recommendations.
So when you take a look at the documents that Aaron's providing here, there's a couple of things that are going to be squarely in his line of work that are going to be a big part of managing that field. One of those is really the priority list of who gets to use it. So that's what's outlined on the first page, and it goes everything from the in-season high school sports to then, even within that category, being able to decide at what hours are those being used. So, and that's important when you start, we're in the spring right now.
Yeah.
So when you have lacrosse and you have track, those are two activities that aren't congruent together, because one would be using the field with flying balls, the other one is running. So you have to manage those things, and looking at what other opportunities would a sport have to go. Track has one venue, lacrosse has different options. So those are some things then as you work through from the 1 to 6 on Aaron's outline, it starts to better define as far as if somebody wants to use it on Tuesday night at 5 o'clock, this is kind of his prioritization list of kind of how you go about doing that. And then you've outlined your fee structure with really school district groups not having a charge, all the other groups having a charge that's associated with it. And then again, walking through just what you stated as far as the maintenance fee. And then a lot of the ground rules of using the facility and some agreements that would then need to be signed as you move forward with the development.
And those ground rules are basically pulled from what would void our warranty, what wouldn't. So if some of those things were to happen on our field, the turf installer and the turf company or turf installers, that would not be covered then. So if you're to come on there with the incorrect spikes, or if you're to use an unapproved cleaner, things like that, you end up voiding our warranty.
Are the user group categories and the facilities categories part of the policy too? Or no?
That's part of that's currently sits in the rule, 830 rule. So I don't know, I'm not the lawyer in this room, but I don't think that's technically considered a policy, but
but it's published in the policy handbook?
It's published in our policy piece, and I think that's one of the things we should decide is, do we want that to be within policy, or do we want that to be something that we approve on an annual basis with our fees? I almost feel like it should be something we do there because we can be more nimble with it than it being actually in the policy.
what I think happened, and this is just talk from what I've heard from other people, is basically when you start doing these things, something pops up, so then you start adding the bullet points to it. So if you look at underneath that feed box there's something that says additional notes or additional items, and it has we can charge a half day rate. So it's just kind of those things that are added on when they come up, and we should probably have a way to answer that question, and we need to write it down somewhere.
The history of it, Julie, is when the last time we reviewed this policy, we pulled some things out because everything used to be a policy. So we didn't pull everything. We pulled part, but not all of those categories and those fees. We pulled some fee pieces out. And I think as we're going through this now, one thing we would like your feedback on is, do we keep the policy piece relatively straightforward, then reference the fee and the category pieces? That can be something that can be really an administrative document, but that's approved by the board on an annual basis. Because I think that would allow us to be more flexible with those pieces as things evolve and change.
And that seemed to be the perspective of the policy committee at our discussion. We liked a more simplified policy, and that the fee structure and the classifications be left to the administrator, in that he would review them on a yearly basis, so you're not having to change policy every time you have to change a fee. Or the same thing with a category of a participant. We would vote on it on an annual basis, but he'd review it, and then we'd make the changes necessary, needing to change policy.
My only question will be, where all of the supportive documents will be, because it seems like they should all be in one place, someplace. Or reference, for specifics on categories and
maybe that's a piece we've got to pop on. We have to create a space on our website that really shows what those are to make them more transparent.
Otherwise, people are not, you're going to get more calls on all that stuff anyway.
Right.
So, all the fee structure, how much it costs to use this.
Correct. I think that's something we can put on our website. We can make that available. Right now, when they call your office, you're going to be that would be something that you'd be walking them through as they're going through. And we chasing down all these documents as we've separated some out over the last 5-6 years. That's been the problem. Some have kind of got, who has the copy of it? We need to maintain that. And I think that's a piece that has to be brought in and tightened up here. But there's enough things that I think continue to evolve that we need to give Aaron some flexibility with, and that we would when I look at the fee structure pieces that Steve brings forward as the budget every year, to me, this can just go right with it. So you get your, because there's some things on the fees we don't change every year, but you see it. And we could do the exact same thing here, is just facility use categories and fees comes through that fee period as it would with your budget. Do you see any concern with that, Steve?
Aaron, I had a question on some of the fees.
Sure.
The Warrior Stadium and Performing Arts, you have hourly rates, but then you jump to Facility 1, which I think would be like the smaller auditorium, and you have just lumps.
So the way that it's been set up here in the past, the class 1, 2, 3, and 4, those have been on half day and full day charges. So when you see for like class 1 facilities where it's say $400, that's a full day charge for the field house. That would be a full day charge, and then you could also be charged half of that if you use it for under 4 hours or under. That's how it's been set up in the policy. When I came here, the PAC has its own separate fee schedule that not only is hourly in terms of, and part of the reason, trying to summarize it in that little box, I was just giving you a snapshot. If you look there, if there's more detail, you need to go to the PAC page. I was just trying to give you a quick snapshot of the most basic fee charge there. But if you look at the PAC charge, it has to do with audience hours versus rehearsal hours, lighting and sound hours, technician needed, not needed. So there's a lot more detail in that. So that first box is just to kind of give you a basic idea of what the first charge would be. When it comes to using the PAC, we don't, in this district, we haven't just allowed someone to come in and use the PAC. You know, whereas, and what I mean by that is we just turn the lights on and let you be. Whereas in a gym or the field house, you know, what our maintenance guys do, the lights are on, they make sure it's unlocked for you, same with the classroom, but there's not someone sitting in that room the entire time you're there, making sure sound is working, making sure your technology smartboard is working, making sure the scoreboards come down or not. You know, the maintenance guys are, custodians are there, they've turned it on, they've opened it up for you, but they go on with their cleaning schedule or whatever projects need, like the high school Neil might have assigned them for that night. Whereas at the PAC, Rick or someone else is sitting there the whole time, making sure the lights and the sound and all that. We don't let an outside person operate those boards and things like that nature. So it's a much more personnel intensive rental than using the small auditorium, using a classroom, or using a gymnasium necessarily.
What I would ask the board is to take a look through these documents. If you have some feedback, you can shoot it to me or directly to Aaron. And what we will then do is, every time I look at it, there's something, there's so many moving parts to this.
You could really, each one of these sections could
be
work
its own
for
topic.
a long time.
So we'll try to, as we bring this back next month, make sure we isolate out what you're voting on, and we'll also make sure that we outline very clearly anything with regards to what's in policy and out, so you can see that. But the way we'll proceed is trying to keep the language aspects within the policy, the pieces that are associated with the fee structures for all the different areas as outside of policy, and we'll share with you kind of what our plan is, to Peggy's point, to make them available.
I do have one quick comment or question. I mean, it's amazing the stuff that you have to be careful on artificial turf.
Yes.
I mean, I was wondering when you're like, no, you know, I mean, wow, you know, even little.
Well, before, and this was part of the conversations, before setting foot onto the field, that needs to be signed. You won't be
No, I understand. I mean, and my guess is I know that there was an issue with, I think Middleton Cross Plains or something. maybe they didn't have something like this in place, and that's why it started breaking down on them? Or?
No, Middleton Cross Plains, and I'm not a total expert on that situation, but one of the things that field turf had run into is their UV protection wasn't living up to, I don't know if this is right, but it wasn't living up to expectations. So the sun was actually breaking down the field turf fields faster than was expected. And so that's where the disputes came from there was field turf saying, no, this is not our issue, this is somebody else's issue, and Middleton saying, no, it's your issue. The genesis for me creating that document not only came from just looking at the list of do's and don'ts that could void our warranty when you're putting this kind of investment, especially community members, our youth groups, people like that have kind of entrusted us with a lot of their money over the next few years, is to make sure we don't mishandle that or do something to damage that trust. But also talking with Waunakee and their athletic director has been a great help. He has a similar document to that. Okay. He requires his conference opponents plus outside groups. Should. Yeah. And that's part of why I think in the end there it says, you will be billed if there's damage, for any kind of repair or replacements that need to be done. Because the company doesn't really care if you knowingly or unknowingly let someone violate what's on their warranty.
Any other questions for Eric? Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Goals committee?
Oh, our only update was we just reviewed how we were going to carry out the linkage meeting, which happened.
So we'll be bringing back the linkage meeting notes and the eval to the next goals committee, and that can filter back in through the full board.
Insurance committee. Steve?
Sure, thank you, Joan. Just a quick reminder, you don't see...
90 minutes or less.
What's that? You got it, all right, I got it, thank you. We typically only present insurance committee recommendations once a year. So just as a reminder, we have an insurance committee made up of board representatives, administration, and staff. This year we met 3 times. The last meeting, which you'll see these recommendations in front of you tonight, really discussed a couple topics: the rate renewal for dental, the rate renewal for health, and then also a recommendation for a new benefit program, which is called a voluntary staff vision plan. That plan has been implemented in nearby districts like Middleton, Cross Plains, this previous January 1st. So that information is included as well. The insurance committee is recommending adding that voluntary vision program effective January 1st of 2018. They are recommending a 5% increase in our district self-insured dental program, and we were provided with a 5% increase in our deemed health insurance program rate renewal. As a reminder, we are going to be entering the last year of our multi-year agreement with Dean. And as I mentioned, the insurance committee will be extremely busy in 2017-18 as the Dean contract expires, the trial period for the wellness clinic ends, and a review of benefits offered and insurers will likely take place. So the docket will be very full for the insurance committee next year as we move forward, but tonight you have the recommendations in front of you for the renewal for July 1st. And if I can just take a quick 30 seconds and mention that one of our retirees, Kathy Bartling, had her last committee meeting. At the last meeting, if you see her at the staff recognition process retirement this Friday, mention it to her, because I'm not sure I know for sure, but she may have set the record in the district for longest period of time on a standing committee, because my understanding it's more than 2 decades. So yeah, someone may have done more than that, but I think it'd be pretty hard to find someone who spent more than 2 decades on a committee. So it was Kathy's last meeting, just a quick shout out to her for her more than 2 decades worth of commitment to really this staff insurance committee process, and quite a tremendous commitment on her end to be a part of it for that long. So throw it over to any board members with questions.
I did have one question on the information that was in our packet where it said the balance in the self-insured dental program increased from a negative 3,000 to a positive. It's not a typo, that is true.
That is not a, yes, that is not a typo.
Okay.
Thus, the 5% increase.
Got it.
Okay, so we need approval on those things?
So moved.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Consent agendas, we're getting to the bottom. So, we can take these all at once, or we can pull anything out, and there's a lot in there.
Motion to approve the consent agenda in its entirety.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
That's what you waited for all night was the AFS piece was tied
Oh,
in.
is that what they're saying?
Yes.
We learned a lot.
I'm sorry.
We just
Yeah.
moved here, so it's good to.
They're the
AFS.
hosts for the AFS students.
Oh.
So at the beginning I
We
shared
love
it, so at the
AFS
end they says, that's all right.
Hopefully that was the longest part of the process.
Yeah.
Was sitting here.
It was a lot to learn, but it'll be number 7 for us. We've had really good experience with hosting.
Awesome.
Oh, wow. Oh, great.
Thank you for that.
6 in Minnesota, 6 our first Wisconsin students, so we'll be exploring the state all within.
Nice.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Good,
Well,
good
thanks
to
for
have
being
you.
here, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We've heard good things about the school district, so.
Perfect.
Shortness of our meeting?
Make sure we correct that.
Because of rumors.
Okay. All right. We do have a few other items. We're not quite done. Board business. Mark's letter. How do
Mark,
we want to?
yeah, Mark has 2 letters in front of you this evening. One is with regards to the $200 per student advocacy, and the other one with regards to feedback on the referendum issues. These were things that we discussed at the last meeting. I think Mark has taken some of the input that has come forward and put them forward. I think there's really 2 options of what we could do tonight. One, we could adopt this for these to be moved forward, and those who are willing and desiring to sign off are able to do so. I think that's how it was discussed at a previous meeting. The other piece is, since these were not in board book, and we are together next Monday, that is an option. We could take any final, I won't get you any more feedback. We'll handle any edits here. Yeah, we're back we have a curriculum meeting on Monday.
Yes.
We could do any sign-offs at that time. So I'll leave that up to the board of how you would like to handle that, or if there's any feedback on the items in front of you.
I would like to suggest a little bit of a language change in one of them. If you guys want to understand. On the referendum one, down in there where you're kind of mentioning the negative effects of it, you have a line, additionally would overturn decisions made by the local taxpayers. It's on the next to last paragraph. And I was just thinking of adding 2 lines. To me, in talking with a few people, this has been about the biggest thing, is that, and I'll send you the text, just saying almost by definition these referendums will eventually fail due to their constant requirement to have never-ending elections, since the elections only end once failure is achieved. And once that future vote kills that operational funding referendum, the money to pay the bills for lights, heat, water, etc. will be gone, and many schools will be forced to close due to the loss of millions of dollars required to keep those schools open. I mean, I believe, what was our total? You kind of mentioned it last meeting. Is
It
around
was 2.16 million in the last referendum, but you go back to 2004 and 2005, those totaled 1.2 million. So just in those alone, you're over $3 million.
that we will lose in one election.
Wow.
And every 5 years, we will keep trying to not lose it. by definition, you know, this is the same as the requirement to constantly vote your union back in. By definition, eventually you're gonna lose an election. Every candidate does. And eventually this one will lose. And I think it's from the few things I've heard about a little bit of lobbying around this, the one thing that's starting to sink in is you're guaranteeing your school districts will lose millions of dollars. There's no other way to look at it. And I think I would just rather see a little stronger language making that very clear.
Well, and it's also what you're doing is you're telling us a story too. I mean, because you're putting numbers against and saying, well, I mean, if we could tie it to our numbers, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think we should.
That would probably even be stronger yet, is to say Waunakee alone has 3 operational referendums that once they fail, we will lose that many millions of dollars. I mean, I don't know how you say you're not either shutting down an elementary school or you're not getting rid of something.
I'm not disagreeing, but
That's 10% of our
what
budget.
happens when you have declining enrollments and you've got an operational referendum? You know, with the funding formula right now, if you have declining enrollments, you get less funds. But with these operational referendums that we put in, they go on forever, right? So they go on forever.
Some do, so yeah. The operational referendums they either have
Are
ones
there
that have a time limit, or there's ones that are recurring. The ones that are, and districts pass both kinds. We've always done the recurring ones because they're for continual operations of a building. Other districts have not been able to pass those where they've come back, but they also are mainly not tying those recurring referendums to building projects. They're tying them to programs. So they're saying in order to continue our programs, we need X dollars. We're going to do it over for the next 3 years. You approve us to exceed the caps, and then in 3 years they go back. So Portage is a good example. They go back every 3 to 5 years. I think it's every 3 years, and they've done that for 18 years. So, but Dave's point is accurate. You lose you have to go back. The question we would have would be north of $3 million just for the operations of the school.
And that's 10% of our entire budget in 1 year gone from now on. I don't know how, I mean, you could talk about declining enrollment. I don't see a declining enrollment of 10% of our entire district.
No, I'm not saying
at any
this
point.
district, I'm talking more globally.
It's a global state picture.
Statewide, you know, you pass these continuing referendums, and, you know, you pass one for $2 million and it just keeps on going, your population goes down. You know,
But that's what the state funding formula deals with, though. That's why Stoughton's
yeah, but
in
if
trouble.
you have $2 million in there, and the population goes down.
And when that population goes down, the state cuts your funding to make up for it, right? Isn't that why Stoughton ended up having to do an operational referendum? Because the state cut their funding due to declining enrollment so much, they couldn't make their budget.
Yeah, it impacts the funding form. That doesn't impact the referendum. It'll affect the state funding, school funding form.
Okay. And they'll cut your money far faster than your student.
Well, I
funding will.
think we can have this discussion someplace else.
But
So,
if you don't mind, Mark, I'll send out that language.
What I would suggest, and I think it's great, I would send it to Randy so that it's, and if anyone else has any other addition, it'd be quicker and
Why don't we just do that? Mark's done a great job getting these to this point. Why don't you send in anything else right now to Rebecca and I, and we will make sure that we get it into the. And what we'll do is, if we have any other feedback on what you see, we will have this then on letterhead so that individuals can sign it on Monday if they choose.
I likely won't be able to attend that meeting, but I will get over here at some point and sign.
That would be great. So we'll tell you when we'll have them ready by end of the week.
And I would suggest if anyone doesn't feel they can sign it, then we should let Randy know so that we can remove their names so they're not included with the letter, even though it will go out for those who sign.
That would be
Well,
great.
wouldn't it be interesting, there have been times when not all board members want to sign it.
Right.
Yep. You just let me know that as well. We'll go from there.
Yep.
Okay.
Great, super, thank you.
Any other board business?
Board business, no.
Okay, so future agendas and meetings.
I'll try to make this as quick as possible. Special meeting next Monday. This is the one with regards to our curriculum meeting, where we'll be meeting at 4:30. We're going to change the venue of this to the high school. The groups that are presenting all have links at the high, or have their.
Is it at 4?
Is it 4?
4 o'clock.
Thank you, Rebecca. 4 o'clock.
I'm gonna be slightly late.
All right. Very good.
Okay, we're in the high school?
We're going to start off in the commons, and then we will split off from there.
LMTC.
Oh, man,
We're
I'm
gonna
just
start
not doing
in the
well.
We're starting in the Lemtech?
Yeah.
Rebecca will
Okay,
send
not
that
the
back out. Yes. So let me start over. Next Monday, 4 o'clock, high school LMTC. We will then have breakouts from there. We have 4 curricular areas that we will be talking about. All right. Second item is budget committee. Steve, you said is that?
So quite a while ago, the budget committee set all our meetings throughout the spring just to get them on the calendar. Now the committee membership has changed, plus I know Gary, I think you had mentioned you weren't available on the date that we had picked, which was Tuesday the 30th at 8 a.m. So why don't we just start over and try to find a different date? And I believe the new committee is Jack, Gary, and Julie, is that correct? So, whatever the preference is, but Gary, do you want it to maybe move on to the next week? Would that be better for you?
Yeah, or even later that week in the day is fine. I don't know how you are for morning meetings or day meetings anymore.
I'd prefer the evening meetings, but I think I can do like a 7:30. Could we do 7:30? 7:30 to 8:30 in the morning.
On what day?
I think I'm pretty much available that week.
Julie, you got any day on the week of the 29th, after Memorial Day?
I'm mostly open.
So 7:30 in the morning.
On Tuesday in particular?
No, not Tuesday.
No.
Oh,
Can't
not
do
Tuesday.
I can't do Tuesday, but Wednesday or Thursday I could.
Not Thursday.
So Wednesday.
And what is that date?
So I think the 31st at 7:30 a.m. Is
Yep.
that correct?
Yep.
That's here.
I'll be here.
I can't stay for a 6-hour meeting.
We'll move it.
We'll condense
move
it.
it
We
fast.
did that.
All right,
We
good deal.
did that already. So thank you very much.
Yep.
All right. We also would like a facilities committee. So facilities is Dave, Gary, and Joan. Is there a time date, Steve, that you're looking at?
I'd say either the week of the 26th or week of the following, I'm sorry, the week of May 29th or the week of June 5th, I'm sorry. Either one of those would be fine.
I'm out of town, June.
So, what about if we, the 1st, Thursday the 1st?
Okay. Is this facilities?
Yep.
So I can do 4 o'clock
On June 1st, Gary, what do you think?
I can do like 5:36 probably. I don't think they got sectional games then if we get to that, but.
Would you rather it be 6?
Pardon?
Would you rather 6 o'clock?
Yeah.
6 o'clock on the 1st? Okay. Goals committee. Peggy, Joan, and Mark. Is there a preference, Peggy, and when you'd like to meet?
Well, let's see. Well, what do people have scheduled already around that week of Memorial Day?
Yeah, we have budget on the 31st in the morning. We have facilities on the 1st in the evening.
What's your schedule like, Mark? I know that some days are better for you than others.
Well, Tuesdays and Thursdays I can't meet during the day until after 5.
Okay, so you said the 31st might be open, and you've got another meeting, somebody on the committee?
31st I could probably, we could work on that day.
31st, so
Okay,
Peggy,
Joan,
Joan,
did you have
Mark,
something already that day?
31st, does that work?
That's okay.
So if we
You
did
looking
go,
during the day,
what's
or-
a good
I
time?
mean, is morning better before you get on the project?
Well, okay,
I just booked you, but I could move that if you wanted me to.
You can probably move me. That'd be
Yeah.
fine.
I can't meet till after 3, that's a parent care day.
After 3?
So if you guys meet and I can't be
Oh.
there, that's fine.
So if we did the 31st at like 4,
Everyone's just
Like at
4 would
4
be
o'clock?
fine.
does that work?
Okay.
Goals at
The
4?
31st.
At
Yep. Jigsaw puzzle. And then, Human Resources. I know, Connie, we have one scheduled already. I
It's
must wonder,
June 6th from 8 to 9:30.
Joan, Julie, and Peggy. We have one at the 6th at 8 o'clock.
I will be here.
Okay. So can we reschedule the?
Yeah, can I send something out as
Yep.
schedule, because I don't know that we need to meet.
All right.
Okay.
That's fine.
That's good.
Why don't we just take a look at that?
What?
Well,
All
maybe
right.
not yet.
I think that's all.
Well, unless it's
Yeah, that's
digging
not-
deeper
And
into
then,
the details.
this is what Jim gave me for
Now that
curriculum.
we're on salary, we should do as many meetings as
No.
possible.
And then the,
Wait a minute.
got one more thing quick, so we'll, Connie,
Well, I
you can
think
send
we gotta
something
get
out with
more
that.
efficient on what we do.
What's that? Okay, curriculum committee, I have some dates from Tim.
Yeah.
Crazy.
All right, okay, May 17th at 3.
That works for me.
And this is Julie, Mark, and Jack.
What time are you done? Can you make it in the, what
In the
works?
afternoon?
Yeah, does that work? 3 o'clock?
Yeah.
Would the 17th work? May
May
17th?
Works for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, right now it does.
All right, well, why don't we do that one, 7? And
May 17th.
May 17th at 3 p.m.
Okay.
Excellent.
That's
Thank
it?
you all. Yes, we're good.
Okay.
Thank you all.
We're
Great
done.
job.
Well, somebody's got to move
Motion
us.
to adjourn.
All right.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you all.
May.
Thank you.
All those who say nay have to stay.
Yeah, I see that. I saw that. I saw.